The woman Denise had brought to buy the farmhouse stopped at Ruth Calder's $5 stand before she ever looked at the house. She picked up a paper sack, turned one of the apples in her hand, and rubbed its dull gold skin against her sleeve. Scott was still carrying the handwritten sign he had pulled down 10 minutes earlier. $5 a bag, Ruth had printed with a black marker that smelled like gasoline. The woman took a pocket knife from her purse. Denise gave the quick, apologetic laugh she used when she wanted strangers to know she came from better habits than her family. They're not treated or polished or anything. That's generally how apples come off trees, the woman said. She cut a narrow slice and tasted it, then another. Beyond her, the orchard climbed the wet September hill in crooked rows, thinner than it had been in Walter's time, but not dead. Not yet. The woman closed her knife. Who still owns the orchard? We do, Denise said. I do, Ruth said at the same time. For one small second, no one moved. Even the yellow jacket seemed to hang motionless above the open sack. Scott looked at the sign in his hand. The woman's eyes went from Denise to Ruth, and Ruth understood that whatever her children had told her before the visit, they had not expected their mother to answer for herself. 3 hours earlier, Denise had arrived with plastic storage bins. That should have warned Ruth. People brought pies when they came to visit. They brought coffee, grocery store flowers, or nothing at all. Plastic storage bins meant they had developed a plan for someone else's belongings. Denise came through the back door without knocking, wearing cream-colored pants inappropriate for any property containing soil. She set the bins beside the washing machine and kissed the air near Ruth's cheek. You're not dressed. Ruth looked down at her flannel shirt and jeans. Then, this is going to be embarrassing for both of us. For the showing, Mom. You said a woman was coming to look. That's a showing. A showing involves a price. I haven't given anybody a price. Denise opened her mouth, paused, and smiled with an effort Ruth could almost hear. Her daughter had inherited Walter's straight brown hair and Ruth's unfortunate ability to look annoyed while claiming not to be. At 46, Denise wore her hair tucked behind one ear when she was nervous, just as she had when asking to borrow the car at 22. It's exploratory, she said. You don't have to decide anything. Miriam Bell is interested in acreage, and Julie says she's serious. Who's Julie? My agent. Why does your agent know about my acreage? Denise carried the bins toward the pantry. Can we please not make every sentence a courtroom cross-examination? Ruth followed her. If this were a courtroom, somebody would have made coffee. The pot on the counter had gone bitter from sitting since 5:30. Denise poured herself a cup anyway, tasted it, and made a face. You need one of those machines that turns itself off. I have one. Her name is Ruth. Very funny. I thought so. The pantry door stood open behind Denise. Walter's old canvas coat still hung from a hook inside, though it had not been worn in 11 months. Ruth had moved it there from the mudroom in June, because seeing it every time she entered the house had become unbearable. Now she saw it less often and for longer. Denise touched the sleeve. We could start with his clothes. No, not throw them away. Sort them. No. Mom, you can't keep everything exactly where Dad left it. I moved that coat. From one hook to another. It was a difficult journey. Denise closed her eyes. When she opened them, the irritation had softened into something closer to weariness. I'm trying to help you. Ruth knew that. That was the trouble. Cruelty would have been easier to refuse. Outside, a truck door slammed. Scott came in carrying a cardboard tray with 3 coffees and a white bakery bag pinched between his teeth. He was 43, broad through the chest, and already walking with the careful stiffness Walter had developed at 60. He set the coffees down and rescued the bag. I brought peace offerings, he said. You brought 3 coffees when 2 were already here, Denise said. I brought good coffee. Ruth took the cup marked black. Then you may stay. Scott kissed the top of her head. The gesture was affectionate and faintly patronizing, like she was a favorite lamp. He noticed the bins. Oh, good. You got the tubs. We're not doing clothes, Denise said. Scott glanced at Ruth. Tools? No, Ruth said. Pantry? No. Old tax receipts? You two can leave in the plastic tubs if that would be convenient. He grinned, but Denise did not. The buyer was due at 11. Ruth learned this at 8:12, along with the fact that Julie the agent would not be attending because Denise had offered to keep it informal. Scott had come to straighten the packing shed and hide what he called roadside clutter. Denise intended to make the house seem larger by removing half the evidence that anyone lived there. They spoke in the language of temporary measures. Just clear the counters, just put away the extra chairs, just let Miriam see the possibilities. Every just moved Ruth another inch toward the edge of her own property. Scott ate an apple fritter over the sink while he examined the kitchen ceiling. That stain's bigger. It hasn't rained in 4 days. That doesn't mean it got smaller. The roofer comes Tuesday. You called a roofer? I know how telephones work. He brushed crumbs from his shirt. How much is he charging? Ruth drank her coffee. Mom, more, now that he knows you're interested. Denise started stacking Ruth's mail. We're asking because you said money was tight. I said fertilizer was expensive. You said the property taxes went up. Everybody's property taxes went up, and the pump needed replacing. The pump was replaced, with $8,000 from savings, $7,400. Scott leaned against the counter. That correction is not comforting. Ruth looked from one child to the other. They had their father's habit of forming a semicircle when they wanted agreement, as though blocking all visible exits made an argument more persuasive. I am aware of what things cost, she said. No one said you weren't, Denise replied too quickly. Then stop giving me arithmetic lessons in my own kitchen. Scott picked up his coffee. All we're saying is that you've got 18 acres, a 4-bedroom house, 3 outbuildings, and 1 functional knee. Both knees function. One complains. You know what I mean. She did. She knew what they meant even when they took great care not to say it. 11 months without Walter had made every ordinary difficulty look like evidence. The porch ice she had once salted herself became proof she should not live alone. A late electric bill became proof she could no longer manage paperwork. The step stool in the kitchen might as well have been a loaded pistol. The maddening part was that some of their evidence was good. Her right hand cramped when she peeled apples. She had stopped using the upstairs shower after nearly slipping in, May. 2 weeks earlier, she had stood beneath the north block and stared at fruit beyond her reach, furious at the simple height of it. But needing help was not the same thing as becoming available for rearrangement. At 9, Scott went outside. At 9:10, Ruth heard Wood scraping gravel. She found him beside the road, dragging Walter's old workbench away from the tin awning. 3 paper sacks of apples sat on the ground. The coffee can was tucked under his arm. What are you doing? Cleaning up. Put it back. It looks like nobody's supervising it. Nobody is? You leave cash out here? Mostly people leave cash. He shook the can. Coins and folded bills rattled inside. How much did you make yesterday? $12? He waited, apparently expecting the number to improve. And a button, Ruth added. Scott opened the can. There is actually a button in here. Gray. 4 holes. Who pays for apples with a button? Somebody who needed apples more than a button. He laughed despite himself, then caught sight of Denise watching from the porch and became serious again. Mom, a buyer's coming. The apples are not inside the house. She's going to drive right past this. It makes the place look... He stopped. Alive? Ruth suggested. Unmaintained. The word hurt more than it deserved to. Ruth looked uphill toward the orchard. Grass had grown high between the lower rows. Several trees leaned under uneven weight, and one near the drainage ditch had split after a storm. Walter would have hated the suckers sprouting around the trunks. He would also have handed Scott a pruning saw and asked why his mouth was working harder than his arms. It's a farm stand, Ruth said. It's a bench with a coffee can. It has a roof. It has half a roof. It faces west. The other half would be showing off. Scott rubbed his forehead. Can we put it in the shed for one morning? No. Why? Because Walter had built it the summer after his second heart attack, when he was forbidden to lift bushel crates and angry at everyone who noticed. Because he had sat under that ridiculous half-roof, calling out incorrect change totals while Ruth filled bags. Because after the funeral, the first sound that had made the property feel inhabited was a truck driver dropping $5 into the coffee can. Ruth said, because the apples are for sale. Scott set the can on the workbench. No one is driving out here for $5 apples. Then it won't inconvenience your buyer. Denise came down the walk, stepping around a patch of mud with an offended little hop. We're not mocking you, she said, which was how Ruth learned they had been. Scott lifted both hands. I never said mocking. You called it her little stand on the phone. It is little. You laughed. You laughed too. Denise shot him a look sharp enough to peel fruit. Ruth bent to pick up a sack. Pain pinched her knee, quick and hot, and she steadied herself against the bench. Both children moved toward her. She hated them for moving and loved them for moving and hated herself most for making the distinction. "I have it," she said. Scott took the other 2 sacks but did not argue. Together they returned the apples to the workbench. Ruth propped up her sign. The cardboard had softened at one corner from damp. $5 a bag. Honor system. Please don't honor yourself to 2 bags. Walter had added the last line. At 10:50, a dark blue station wagon turned into the drive. It slowed beside the stand. Denise whispered, "Oh, for God's sake." The driver's window lowered. Miriam Bell looked out at them, then at the apples. Scott had Ruth's sign in his hand again. He had pulled it down while Ruth was watching the station wagon approach. Miriam stepped out and greeted Denise, who became instantly brighter. "We thought we'd begin inside," Denise said. "The kitchen was updated in 2017, and the original dining room has—" "What kind are these?" Miriam asked. Ruth answered, "Calder Golds." Miriam picked up an apple. Denise laughed and warned her that it had not been polished. Miriam cut it open, tasted it, and asked the question none of them had prepared for. "Who still owns the orchard?" "We do," Denise said. "I do," Ruth said. In the silence that followed, Scott slowly lowered the sign to his side. Miriam studied Ruth's face. "All 18 acres?" "Yes." "And the trees?" "They generally go with it." Something almost like amusement touched Miriam's mouth. Denise recovered first. "Of course Mom is the legal owner. When I said we, I meant the family." "No," Ruth said. "You meant we." Scott shifted his weight. "Mom, come on." Miriam looked past them toward the hill. Her attention rested on the orchard with an unsettling patience, as if the neglected rose were saying something she could hear. Then she held out the cut apple to Ruth. "How many of these trees are still producing?" Ruth looked at the brown seeds, the dense yellow flesh, the skin Walter had once insisted was the color of October sunlight. "Depends what you mean by producing. I mean enough to matter." Behind Ruth, Denise drew a breath to answer. Miriam did not look at her. Neither did Ruth. "Enough to matter to whom?" Ruth asked. Miriam nodded once, as if this were a better answer than a number. "To somebody willing to pick them. That eliminates my children." Scott gave a short laugh. Denise did not. Miriam bit into the apple slice again, closer to the peel. "The flesh hasn't gone soft. They hold." "How long?" "In a root cellar, properly wrapped. We used to have good ones into February. Maybe March if the winter behaved. Weather rarely behaves." "No, but it enjoys being discussed." That earned Ruth the full smile Miriam had so far withheld from everyone else. It changed her face, not by making her warmer exactly, but by revealing that warmth was available. "Could I see the trees?" she asked. Denise stepped between them with such polished ease that someone less practiced at being her mother might not have recognized it as an interception. "Absolutely. We were going to start with the house and then walk the property. There's a beautiful view from the upstairs bedroom. I'd rather see where this came from first." Miriam lifted the apple. Scott looked up the hill. "It's wet. I have shoes. There are holes. I have ankles too." Ruth liked her a little for that, which made her cautious. Liking strangers had become dangerous since Walter died. People mistook it for agreement, loneliness, or permission to move furniture. "I'll show you," Ruth said. Denise looked down at Ruth's boots. "Should you be going up there?" "It's my hill." "That wasn't my question." "No, it was your answer." Ruth took the narrow grass lane beside the packing shed. Miriam fell into step with her. Scott followed, carrying the cardboard sign for no reason except that he had not found a dignified place to put it. Denise came last, holding her pants above the ankles. The lower orchard smelled of wet leaves and fermenting windfalls. Yellow jackets crawled drunkenly through split fruit. Ruth stepped around the soft brown patches by instinct. Her rubber boots knew the ground better than she did some days. Miriam paused at the first row and put a hand against the trunk of a tree that leaned east. "How old?" "That one?" 38 years, maybe 39. "You planted it?" "Walter did the digging. I put the tree in crooked. It's still here, out of spite." Miriam examined the leaves, then the fruiting spurs. Her fingers were careful. She did not touch the trees like a person admiring scenery. She looked beneath branches, checked the bark near the graft union, and pressed her thumb into a spot of lichen. Scott noticed too. "You know orchards?" "A little." Denise laughed. "More than us, apparently. Not more than your mother." Ruth kept walking before Denise could decide whether she had been insulted. The first 6 rows had produced tolerably well. Ruth told Miriam which ones had been thinned, which had dropped early after a hard June rain, and where the deer had pushed through the fence. She did not mention that she had paid Ellis Boone $600 in cash to prune the southern edges last February, because she knew what Scott would say. Ellis was 74 and complained about his shoulder while swinging a pruning saw above his head, but he knew each tree's history almost as well as Ruth did. At the 7th row, the grass grew knee-high. Miriam stopped. Why the change? Couldn't get to all of it. Scott stepped forward. This is what we've been trying to explain. The whole place needs serious work. I can see that, Miriam said. Tree removal, spraying, mowing, drainage, and that's before you get to the buildings. Denise pointed toward the farmhouse, visible below them. The house itself is in very good shape. Ruth watched Miriam study the upper rows. She seemed to be counting. Not trees exactly, but possibilities between them. How many are Calder Golds? She asked. Maybe 160 still living. 110 worth calling trees. Scott frowned. There are that many? There were 208. How do you know? Because we planted 208. Miriam glanced at him. That kind of thing tends to stick. They went higher. Ruth's knee began to warm with a deep grinding ache. She adjusted her stride and hoped Denise would remain occupied with mud. At the edge of the north block, a low branch caught Ruth's sleeve. She pulled free too sharply and lost her footing. Miriam caught her elbow. It lasted 1 second. No fall, no cry, no damage. Still, Ruth felt Scott and Denise tense behind her. I'm fine, she said. Miriam released her immediately. I know. That answer steadied Ruth more than the hand had. Scott moved closer. We can turn around. We can, Ruth agreed, and continued uphill. The north block had suffered most after Walter got sick. Canker marked several trunks. One tree had collapsed into another, its roots tilted out of the soil like knuckles. Ruth did not look away from any of it. If Miriam had come to see the orchard, she would see the orchard, not Walter's best October, photographed from a flattering angle. At the top, the land flattened into a weedy strip beside the old irrigation pond. From there, the farmhouse roof showed its rust along the back edge. The packing shed listed slightly. The tin over Ruth's stand flashed silver near the road. Denise spread one hand toward the view, as though she had arranged it. You can see all the way to the ridge. Miriam was looking at an apple. She had plucked it from an unpruned tree, smaller than those on the stand, and freckled with black spots. She cut it open. The flesh was clean. You don't spray? She asked. Not in 4 years. Walter stopped. Walter got lymphoma. The word lay between them, without decoration. Miriam lowered the knife. I'm sorry. He was too. Scott turned toward the pond. Denise stared at the house below. Ruth took the apple half Miriam offered. It was tart, denser than the fruit from the lower rows, with the dry spice Walter used to claim tasted like clove. Ruth had never tasted clove in it. She tasted an apple she had known longer than she had known either of her children. What are you looking for? She asked. Miriam wiped the blade on the grass before folding it. I was told this was a residential property with usable agricultural acreage. Denise spoke quickly. It is. That's not what I asked. Miriam's eyes remained on Ruth. I'm looking at several properties, she continued. I'm interested in establishing a small pressing operation. Juice, cider, preserves, eventually. Sourcing fruit locally, if there's enough worth sourcing. Scott crossed his arms. You want to build a factory? A press house is not a factory. It sounds industrial. So does a riding mower if you say it with enough suspicion. Ruth bit the inside of her cheek. Denise did not bother. Julie said you wanted a country residence. Julie heard house and acreage and stopped listening after house. You're not interested in living here? I didn't say that. But I'm not buying a 4-bedroom kitchen with an orchard attached. 4-bedroom house, Scott corrected. Miriam looked at him. Yes. Ruth felt something unfamiliar stir beneath her irritation. Not hope. Hope was too expensive to identify early. It was attention. The almost forgotten sensation of another person looking at the land and seeing something besides burden. She distrusted it immediately. These trees aren't ready to supply a business, she said. No. Half need pruning. Some need to come out. Yes. The irrigation lines in the upper rows are useless. Probably. The packing shed has no heat, and one wall moves when the wind blows hard. Miriam looked down at it. Which wall? West. That's inconvenient. It's more inconvenient from inside. Miriam nodded, considering this. Could I take a box of fruit? You can buy a bag for $5. Denise made a small sound behind them. Miriam reached into her jacket pocket and produced a folded bill. At those prices, you'll ruin me. You can have the bruised ones free. No. I want fruit from 3 or 4 parts of the orchard. I'd like to test sugar, acid, storage, if that's all right. Ruth looked at the 20 in Miriam's hand. 4 bags, she said. Agreed. The trip downhill took longer. Ruth allowed Miriam to carry the box because it was sensible, and then resented needing to make that calculation. They selected fruit from the north block, 2 middle rows, and the younger trees near the shed. Scott disappeared briefly and returned without the sign. Ruth later spotted it, leaning safely under the stand's half roof. Inside the house, Denise regained control. She opened curtains. She pointed out the crown molding Walter had installed badly, and Ruth had learned to love. She described the downstairs office as a possible guest suite without mentioning it had been Walter's bedroom during his final 6 months because the stairs became too much. Miriam looked at the rooms, but she asked about truck access, well, capacity, and electrical service to the outbuildings. Scott answered when he could. When he could not, Ruth did. In the pantry, Miriam noticed Walter's coat. She did not touch it. Your husband's? She asked. Yes. How long? 11 months. Miriam looked at Ruth, and whatever she recognized did not appear as pity. Mine's been 6 years. Ruth had not expected that. Husband? Wife. I'm sorry. So was she. The echo was gentle enough that Ruth nearly smiled. Denise had gone still beside the kitchen table. For a moment she looked ashamed, not of Miriam, but of how aggressively she had polished grief out of the house that morning. Miriam took a business card from her purse and placed it on the counter. I'll call after I test the fruit. About buying the property? Denise asked. About the apples. She isn't looking for a tenant, Scott said. Ruth turned to him. I'm standing right here. I know, Mom. You keep saying that while speaking around me. His mouth tightened. Then tell us what you're doing. I just sold $20 worth of apples. This isn't funny. It is a little funny. Miriam picked up the box. At the door, she paused beside Ruth. Who maintains the trees? A man named Ellis helps with pruning, and the rest? I do what I can. Miriam glanced toward Ruth's right hand, curled stiffly around her coffee cup, then back to her face. She did not pretend not to have noticed. I'm not asking whether you can work 18 acres alone, she said quietly. No one can. I'm asking whether you want the orchard to keep being an orchard. Ruth felt the answer rise too quickly. She held it behind her teeth. I'll decide what I want before you call. That seems wise. Miriam left with her box. Her station wagon rolled past the stand, slowed, and then turned onto the county road. Denise waited until the sound faded. What exactly did she mean by tenant? I imagine she meant someone who pays to use land they don't own. You're considering that? I'm considering lunch. Mom. Scott dropped into a kitchen chair. This is why we wanted you to see the place clearly. You've got one person tasting an apple, and suddenly there's some business scheme. I didn't propose anything. You didn't shut it down. Ruth picked up the business card. Miriam Bell. A phone number, an email address, and beneath her name, Bell Regional Foods, former partner. No grand title, no promise. Denise folded her arms. Julie told Miriam the family was preparing to sell. Ruth looked up. Denise's face changed, just slightly. She had heard herself. The family, Ruth said. Meaning you, meaning all of us, discussing what makes sense. We haven't discussed selling. We've discussed that you can't keep this up. That is not the same conversation. Scott stood. No one is trying to take anything from you. Ruth slid Miriam's card into her shirt pocket. Then you should both find it very easy, she said, to stop offering it to strangers. Denise's arms loosened. That's not fair. No, Ruth said. It wasn't. Scott pushed his chair in too hard. Its legs struck the table. We're not strangers. I was talking about Miriam. You know what I mean. Ruth knew several things he might mean, none of which he was willing to place plainly between them. She took bread from the cupboard and sliced it. Her hand cramped halfway through the second piece. She changed her grip before either of them noticed. Are you staying for lunch? Denise stared at her. You can't just make a sandwich and end the conversation. I'm making 3. I don't want a sandwich. 2 then. Scott rubbed the back of his neck. What kind? Turkey. Mustard? I remember how you eat. The fight did not end. It merely changed rooms inside all three of them. Scott sat again. Denise remained standing long enough to show that lunch had not persuaded her, then opened the refrigerator and found the pickles. Ruth put the sandwiches on Walter's old brown plates. Denise removed the bread from one side of hers and ate the turkey folded around a pickle spear. They spoke about the roof until the roofer became a neutral fourth relative. When they were finished, Scott carried the plates to the sink. I'll put the bench back where it was. It is where it was. The sign, then. Under the awning, he glanced at her. I didn't throw it away. I saw. It was not an apology, but Ruth accepted the shape of one. Denise gathered the plastic storage bins and nested them together. The sound echoed in the pantry. I'm taking these, she said. All right, I wasn't trying to empty your house. All right, that doesn't mean you're right. I didn't say it did. Denise held the bins against her hip. Her eyes went to Walter's coat, then away. Julie may call. Why? Because I need to tell her not to bring anyone else. You could have told her that before bringing Miriam. I thought if you met the right person, you might feel differently. About selling, about options. There it was again, that soft, useful word. Options belong to the person offering them. To the person receiving them, they sometimes felt like doors being locked one at a time. Ruth walked Denise to the back door. Don't contact an agent about this property again. Denise's face hardened. You don't have to talk to me like I'm some kind of scam artist. Then don't advertise my home. I didn't advertise it. You brought a buyer you liked. Ruth almost denied it. Instead, she said, That's not the point. Denise stepped outside. It never is with you. Scott left a few minutes later after setting the sign upright and putting the coffee can exactly in the center of the bench. Ruth watched from the kitchen window as his truck followed Denise's sedan down the road. The quiet they left behind was larger than the house. Ruth washed 3 plates and 2 cups. She wiped an already clean counter. When there was nothing else to do downstairs, she climbed to the second floor, holding the banister and resenting the necessity of it. The bedroom she had shared with Walter looked almost untouched, though she had moved a great deal without noticing. His water glass was gone. His reading glasses were in the top drawer. The quilt had migrated toward the middle because Ruth no longer stayed strictly on her side. From the window, she could see Scott's tire tracks near the stand, and Miriam's smaller prints in the damp lane. The orchard rose beyond them, ragged and demanding. Do you want it to keep being an orchard? Ruth had found the question irritating because it contained no accusation. She could not defend herself from it. She went to the desk and opened the drawer where she kept household papers. The property tax bill was clipped to the front of a folder. The second installment was due in 6 weeks. The pump receipt lay behind it. $7,486, including the new pressure tank Scott still thought she had forgotten to count. Ruth wrote figures on the back of an envelope. Pension, Social Security, savings interest so small it felt mocking. Average electric bill, propane, insurance, taxes, the roofer's estimate not yet final. Ellis's winter pruning, fuel for the mower, fertilizer she had delayed buying. The numbers did not order her out of the house. They did ask how long she meant to fight them. Down at the stand, a car stopped. A woman in blue medical scrubs took 1 bag of apples, placed money in the can, and drove away. Ruth watched from the bedroom window until the taillights vanished between the maples. $5 could not repair a roof. It could, however, prove an apple had been wanted. The business card remained in Ruth's shirt pocket until laundry day. She found it before the washing machine did, flattened the bent corner, and put it beside the telephone. Miriam called the following afternoon. I tested your fruit, she said. You work fast. I become unbearable around unanswered questions. So does my daughter. Then I'll try not to meet her in a confined space. Ruth sat at the kitchen table. Rain ticked against the window over the sink. What did the apples say? That you weren't exaggerating? High sugar, strong acid? The bruising stayed localized instead of spreading. I cut the North Block fruit again this morning, and it's still firm. It was on the tree yesterday morning. You'd be surprised what fails that test. I've met peaches, Miriam laughed. I'd like to come back. For more apples? To talk about what might be possible. Ruth looked through the rain toward the packing shed. Walter had painted it red in 1996, then claimed the color had faded prematurely for 25 years. Possible for whom? For you, if you want help keeping the orchard. For me, If there's a workable supply arrangement, possibly other growers later. You said pressing operation. That's the aim. You have one? Not yet. Ruth leaned back. So, you're trying to buy fruit from an orchard that isn't producing enough for a business you don't have. That is the least flattering accurate description. And you were looking at property for it before knowing whether you had fruit. I have access to ordinary fruit. Your apples aren't ordinary. Every seller wished to hear that. Ruth distrusted how easily the sentence found the tender place in her. Come Friday, she said, 10 o'clock. After hanging up, she called Ellis. His wife answered and shouted for him without covering the receiver. Ruth heard a cupboard close, a dog bark, and Ellis say he was coming 3 separate times. Ruth, he said at last, something fall over? Not yet. Then what's the emergency? A woman wants to talk about leasing part of the orchard. There was a pause. Which woman? Her name is Miriam Bell. Bell Regional Foods? She used to be a partner. I know who she is. They put their trucks in every diner between here and Lansing. What do you know about her? That she sold out last year. That she knows the wholesale side. Why's she want your orchard? Ruth told him about the apples. Ellis made a skeptical noise when she described the testing, then asked which rows Miriam had sampled. How much of this place could be productive again? Ruth asked. How much money? I don't know. How much time? I don't know. How much labor? I don't know, Ellis. That is why I called the man who complains he knows everything. I never said everything. I said more than Scott. Scott once pruned a lilac with hedge clippers, and nearly killed it. The lilac is fine. The lilac has low standards. She could picture Ellis at his own kitchen table, one suspender hanging from his shoulder, looking toward the orchard through a window in his mind. The first 6 acres, he said, could clean those up. 25 trees come out. Need to get the soil tested. New lines from the pond, assuming the pump still has enough pressure. It doesn't. Then a pump. Deer fence on the west side. More pruning than I can do alone. You told me your shoulder was improving. My shoulder lies, like a politician or a scale in a doctor's office. What would it cost? More than $12 a day and a button. Ruth smiled despite herself. News traveled faster in families than weather. Scott called you? He asked if your stand made enough to cover taxes. What did you tell him? That if he wanted your finances, he should ask you. Thank you. I also said no. Less helpful. Ellis sighed. 6 acres could come back, not in one season, maybe 3. Anybody promising different is either stupid or planning to sell you something. Will you come Friday? Does this mean coffee? It means I need you to tell me when she's selling me something. Ellis arrived at 9:30 Friday with wet soil on his boots and a folder of notes he claimed not to have prepared. He was tall in the narrow, weathered way of an old fence post, with white hair sticking out below his cap. Ruth made a fresh pot of coffee. You tell the children? He asked. No, they'll hear. They always do. Miriam's station wagon came up the drive at 10. This time she did not stop at the stand, but she looked toward it. 2 bags remained under the awning. Ruth introduced the 2 of them in the packing shed. Ellis and Miriam recognized each other's names, which annoyed Ruth for reasons she could not justify. They began talking about rootstock, fire blight, and alternate bearing, with the quick suspicion of people checking whether the other actually knew anything. Ruth listened until Miriam unrolled an aerial property map across Walter's old sorting table. The paper showed the farmhouse, pond, buildings, and rows reduced to clean lines. Nothing on it revealed mud, grief, or the exact place Walter once dropped a ladder and taught 3 neighboring counties new uses for the Lord's name. Miriam outlined the lower block with her finger. I'm not suggesting 18 acres, she said. I'm suggesting 6 to start. A lease, not a purchase. I would finance part of the rehabilitation in exchange for first rights to the commercial crop at a set formula. You retain the property. For how long? Ruth asked. 10 years. Ellis whistled softly. Miriam looked at him. Trees don't care about quarterly earnings. Neither does Ruth. I'm beginning to understand that. Ruth studied the map. 6 acres looked small on paper. On the ground, it contained almost every good morning she and Walter had shared, and several of their worst arguments. What happens when the crop fails? She asked. We share defined costs. No one pretends weather is breach of contract. When your business fails? Miriam did not flinch. Then you need protections, limits on improvements, removal rights, restoration terms. Lawyers would write it. Lawyers don't prune. No, they make pruning feel inexpensive. Ellis covered a smile with his coffee cup. Miriam moved her finger along the lane. I'd need vehicle access, eventually upgrades to the shed, probably electrical work. None of that happens without agreement. What do you need now? Permission to have the soil and trees professionally assessed. Then we negotiate real numbers. Ruth looked at Ellis. Assessment doesn't promise her anything, he said. But 10 years is a marriage without Christmas. Miriam rolled the map halfway closed, then stopped. There's one other thing I need before spending money on assessments. What? To know who I'm negotiating with. Her voice stayed calm. Yesterday, your daughter represented the property as a family decision. Your son spoke as if continued operation were temporary. I won't put capital into land if 3 people believe they have veto power. Ruth felt irritation rise, then settle into something colder. Denise is cheerful. We had followed Miriam back into the packing shed. You negotiate with me. Will they accept that? They don't have to. Miriam held Ruth's gaze. Legally, no. In practice, angry families can make very expensive weather. From the road came the metallic clink of someone dropping money into the coffee can. Ruth looked through the open shed door at her $5 stand, then at the 6 acres under Miriam's hand. Do the assessment, she said. Miriam did not unroll the map again. Talk to your children first. Ruth's jaw tightened. You asked who owns the orchard. I know who owns it, Miriam said. I'm asking whether you're prepared to act like it when they're in the room. Ruth did not answer immediately. Ellis set down his cup. The shed seemed to hold its breath around the 3 of them, though rainwater still dripped from the damaged gutter and tapped the metal bucket beneath it. That sounded like advice, Ruth said. It is. I didn't ask for advice. You asked me to spend money. No, I gave you permission. Miriam's expression did not change. Those aren't the same thing to me. It was difficult to argue with a woman who remained calm without becoming soft. Walter had possessed the same irritating skill. He could stand at the kitchen sink while Ruth shouted about a broken promise, dry a plate, and say one accurate sentence that made volume useless. She had sometimes wanted to throw the plate. I will speak to them, Ruth said. Then call me. You already have permission for the assessment. I'll wait. You think they'll stop me. I think they'll try. I'd rather discover what that looks like before I hire an agronomist. Ellis examined the aerial map as if it had become fascinating. Ruth folded her arms. You walked up my hill, talked about my trees, and offered 10 years. Now my children get to decide whether you mean it? No. You decide whether I mean it. I decide whether I trust the decision. That landed harder. Miriam rolled the map and slid it into a cardboard tube. I'm not questioning your capacity, Ruth. I'm questioning whether your family understands the boundary around it. They will. Good. Miriam picked up her satchel. Before leaving, she bought the 2 remaining bags from the stand. She put $10 in the can, even though Ruth was close enough to take it from her hand. Ellis waited until the station wagon was gone. I like her, he said. I noticed. That woman could sell sand to a river. She didn't sell me anything. No, that's why I like her. Ruth carried the coffee cups toward the house. You can go home now. I also like you. You can still go home. He followed her into the kitchen and accepted a second cup. Ruth called Denise first because delaying the harder conversation was a habit she did not wish to admit having. Can you and Scott come Sunday? She asked. Is everything okay? Everything is exactly as it was 15 seconds ago. Then, why do you need both of us? To discuss the orchard. There was silence, followed by a change in Denise's breathing. Did Miriam call? Yes. What did she offer? A discussion about buying? No. Another silence, colder than the first. I'll call Scott. I can call him. We should arrive together. Why? So no one hears a different version. Ruth stared at the telephone after Denise hung up. It was an old wall-mounted model with a cord long enough to reach the pantry. Walter had refused to replace it because, he said, no conversation improved when a person could carry it into the bathroom. On Sunday, Denise and Scott arrived within 30 seconds of each other, but in separate cars. Ruth had made pot roast. It was what she cooked when she wanted to prevent an argument, although there was no evidence in family history that beef restrained anyone. Denise brought a salad in a glass bowl. Scott carried a bottle of red wine and a toolbox. What's that for? Ruth asked. Your downstairs window sticks. It is stuck since 2004. So, this won't be an emergency repair. He set the toolbox by the mudroom and kissed her forehead. This time, Ruth accepted the kiss without feeling like furniture. They ate at the kitchen table because the dining room had accumulated boxes of Walter's books that no one was permitted to sort. For 12 minutes, they discussed Scott's work at an industrial supply company, Denise's difficult client at the medical billing office, and a neighbor's runaway goats. Then Denise placed her fork across her plate. All right. All right what? Ruth asked. Tell us. Ruth took a drink of water. She had rehearsed the explanation twice. Both versions had sounded like requests for permission, so she discarded them. Miriam is interested in leasing 6 acres of the orchard. She would share rehabilitation costs and receive first rights to the commercial crop. Nothing has been negotiated. She wants to assess the trees and soil. For how long? Scott asked. Her starting point was 10 years. His eyebrows rose. 10? That's why it's called a starting point? Denise stared at Ruth. You'd let her run a business here? She isn't bringing a business tomorrow. She's evaluating whether one is possible. What exactly does share rehabilitation costs mean? Scott asked. We don't know yet. What would you be responsible for? We don't know yet. Who carries liability? Scott, no contract exists. You're the one announcing a 10-year lease over pot roast. I'm telling you because Miriam asked me to. Denise leaned back. She asked you to get our approval? No, but she knows we object. She knows you told her you own the orchard. I said we. Yes, I remember. So do the Yellow Jackets. Scott pushed his plate away. Can we not turn every concern into a joke? You laugh at my stand. I laughed at the button. You laughed before the button. Fine. I'm sorry I laughed at the stand. The apology came cleanly, without defense. Ruth's prepared anger had nowhere to go. Thank you, she said. Scott nodded. I still think this is a bad idea. Based on what? Based on the fact that you don't know the costs, the terms, or whether the orchard can produce. That is what an assessment is for. Who does the assessment? An agronomist, chosen by Miriam? Yes. Paid by Miriam? Yes. He looked toward Denise, who gave the smallest nod. Ruth set down her fork. Stop consulting each other with your eyebrows. Denise spread her hands. We're trying to understand. No, you're waiting for an opening. For what? To tell me I'm incapable without using the word. Denise's face flushed. You want honesty? Fine. You couldn't walk to the top row without nearly falling. Ruth turned to Scott. He looked down. I told her. Miriam caught you, Denise continued. That's not nothing. It also isn't a fall. You keep minimizing everything. And you keep enlarging it until I fit inside the future you picked. What future did I pick? One where you don't break your hip alone in wet grass. One where my house becomes acreage in Julie's portfolio. I told Julie it's off, after I told you to. What else do you want from me? Recognition that you had no right to put it on. I never listed it. You arranged a buyer. She wasn't even the kind of buyer I thought she was. That improves nothing. Scott held up a hand. Both of you, stop. Neither did. Denise's voice shook. Dad spent the last years of his life trying to keep this place functioning while he was sick. Your father spent the last years of his life being sick while the place continued to exist. You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean. You think the orchard killed him. I think he didn't know when to let go. And you think I don't either. Denise looked away. The refrigerator hummed. Rain began against the kitchen windows, light enough that Ruth could hear individual drops. Scott spoke more quietly. It took everything from him. No, Ruth said. Lymphoma took everything from him. He was on a tractor 3 days after his second treatment. And I was furious. You helped him onto it. He would have gone without help. That's the whole problem with both of you. Ruth flinched because there was truth in it. Not all the truth, but enough. Walter had treated limitation as a personal insult. When his hands shook, Ruth steadied the wrench rather than taking it away. When he could no longer climb the sprayer, she drove while he barked instructions from the ground. Love had made them resourceful and foolish in nearly equal amounts. I'm not Walter, she said. No, Scott replied, but you're doing the same thing, making help prove it loves you by agreeing. The sentence crossed the table and sat beside her plate. Denise looked at her brother, surprised. Perhaps he was too. Ruth folded her napkin. Miriam said no one can work 18 acres alone. Then why keep 18? Denise asked. Because I don't have to destroy what I can't personally carry. Selling isn't destroying, neither is leasing 6 acres. Denise stood and carried her plate to the sink. Water rushed unnecessarily hard from the faucet. What happens to the property afterward? She asked. After 10 years? After you. Scott said her name under his breath, but Ruth raised a hand. There it was. Not hidden greed or a grand betrayal. Just the blunt, ugly mathematics of adult children who had begun privately assigning weight to belongings their mother still used. After me, Ruth said, you and Scott may own an orchard with a tenant. We may own a legal mess, or 6 maintained acres, or a failed business in the packing shed, or nothing if I decide to leave the land elsewhere. Denise turned from the sink. Her face went white. Ruth regretted the words before the last one left her mouth. She had meant to establish a boundary and instead reached for a weapon. Scott stared at her. Would you? I haven't decided anything about an estate that isn't currently available. That's not an answer. No, it's a reminder. Denise shut off the water. At least now we know what kind of discussion this is. She reached for her purse. Sit down, Ruth said. I've lost my appetite. You finished eating? Then I'll leave efficiently. Scott did not move. Denise, she wants us to understand we're replaceable. Ruth stood too fast. Her knee caught, and her hand struck the table. The wine glasses trembled. Both children looked at her right leg. Do not, she said, use my balance to avoid hearing me. Denise's eyes filled, which made her angrier. Then, don't use dying to punish us for worrying. No one spoke after that. Denise left first. Scott stayed long enough to fix the window, driving a screwdriver into the sash with short, controlled movements. Ruth dried the dishes beside him. When the window finally lifted, cool rain air entered the kitchen. I'm not trying to inherit early, he said. I know. Do you? Yes. He put the screwdriver back in the toolbox. I also don't want to spend 10 years dealing with a lease you signed because somebody made your apples sound special. They are special. To you. Ruth looked at him. Scott closed his eyes briefly. That came out wrong. No, it came out. He left with the toolbox. The repaired window remained open behind him. On Monday morning, Ruth called Miriam. They don't approve, she said. Miriam was quiet for a moment. And the land is mine. That answers ownership. You asked whether I could act like it with them in the room. I did. I acted badly, but I did not ask permission. A breath moved across the line, almost a laugh. Do you still want the assessment? Miriam asked. Yes, then I'll schedule it. Ruth hung up and stood beneath the telephone, looking at the damp envelope where she had written her expenses. Outside, the orchard waited with the patience of something that could outlive an argument but not neglect. Ruth told Denise and Scott the assessment would happen Thursday at 8. She did not invite them. She did not forbid them. She sent the same short message to both because Denise had accused her of giving different versions, then spent the next 2 days irritated that neither replied. At 7:50 Thursday morning, Ellis arrived carrying 2 travel mugs and a paper sack darkened with grease. Biscuits, he said. My wife thinks negotiations fail because people get hungry. This isn't a negotiation. Then you only get 1 biscuit. The agronomist came in a mud-spattered white pickup. Her name was Carla Weiss, and she wore orange waterproof overalls that made Denise's cream-colored pants seem like a story from another life. Miriam followed in her station wagon with the aerial map and 3 sharpened pencils. Scott's truck turned in last. Ruth watched him park beside the packing shed. You told him? Miriam asked. I told both of them. That wasn't my question. No, it was my answer. Miriam's mouth moved at one corner. Scott walked over in work boots and a brown jacket Ruth had given him 2 Christmases earlier. He shook Miriam's hand, introduced himself to Carla, and nodded at Ellis. I'm only observing, he told Ruth. You've never only observed anything. I took the morning off. That's your decision. His jaw tightened. Good morning to you, too. They began in the lower block. Carla drove a narrow metal probe into the ground at measured intervals and emptied dark cores of soil into labeled plastic sleeves. Ruth expected something more scientific-looking. Walter had spent years insisting that most expertise involved ordinary objects used with confidence. Carla moved from tree to tree, scraping bark, checking limbs, and tying colored tape around trunks. Green meant manageable. Yellow meant uncertain. Red meant removal. The first red ribbon went on the split tree by the drainage ditch. Ruth had expected it. The second went on a tree Walter had grafted the spring Denise moved into her first apartment. The trunk looked solid from the lane, but Carla peeled back bark near the base to reveal a dark, spreading wound. "This one won't recover," she said. "It fruited last year. Trees can produce while they're dying." Ruth looked at the small red ribbon fluttering against the bark. Scott photographed it. "What's that for?" she asked. "Records." "Whose?" "Ours." Miriam glanced at him. Scott lowered the phone. "The family's." "I'm not interfering." "Photograph green ones too." "I will." He did, but not with the same attention. By the middle rows, the colored ribbons began to form an argument Ruth could not answer. Too much yellow, more red than she wanted. Carla was neither pessimistic nor encouraging. She said things like structurally compromised and moderate rehabilitation potential, while Ruth translated them into mornings she remembered. A red tree near the old fence had once held Walter's lunch in its shade every day for a harvest season. Another had given the best fruit in 2008, when an early frost ruined nearly everything else. Carla was not wrong because she did not know those things. Ruth understood that. She disliked her anyway. At the north block, Carla stopped beneath the tree that had caught Ruth's sleeve during Miriam's first visit. "Who pruned this?" Ellis raised a hand. "Partly." "When?" "Late winter." "Didn't finish the row." "Why not?" "Shoulder." Carla nodded. "The cuts are good." Ellis looked vindicated enough to become annoying. "The canopy's too dense," Carla continued. "But there's no significant canker in the main leader. This group is better than it looks." Ruth touched the rough trunk. "How many?" "I'm not counting until we finish. You're counting in your head. I'm trying not to make promises in an orchard. Everybody keeps saying that." Carla smiled. "Orchards encourage promises they can't keep." The rain held off, but wind pushed cold through the rows. By 11, Ruth's knee had stiffened. She kept pace until Carla knelt to examine irrigation fittings near the pond. Then Ruth sat on an overturned crate by the shed. Scott noticed. He did not ask if she was all right. He sat on the other end. For a minute, they watched Ellis and Carla argue about soil compaction. "You don't have to prove anything to me," Scott said. "I'm sitting. I can see that. You once took a folding chair to a hardware store, grand opening. They were giving away a grill. You didn't win. I got a free hat." Ruth smiled despite herself. Scott picked at a splinter on the crate. "How much money are you thinking of putting into this?" "No one has given me figures." "But you have a limit, of course." "What is it?" "My limit." "Mom?" "No." He exhaled through his nose. "You want me to respect your decisions, but you won't tell me what they are. When I make one, I'll tell you what affects you. A 10-year lease affects me. Not today." "It could." "Yes." "So, could a tornado." "You know that isn't the same." "No, the tornado would finish the conversation faster." He stood. "This is what I mean. You asked for my private finances during an assessment. I asked what you can afford. I can afford a biscuit." Ruth reached into the paper sack. "Would you like half?" He walked away, angry enough not to take it. 2 minutes later, he returned and tore off the larger half. Carla finished after one. They gathered around Walter's sorting table while she arranged samples and notes. 31 trees in the proposed 6 acres required removal. Another 22 might survive, with aggressive pruning and treatment. The lower irrigation system needed replacement, and the pond pump could not reliably serve the upper slope. "So it's not viable," Scott said. "I didn't say that," Carla replied. "You just listed 53 problem trees. Out of the proposed block, there's enough healthy stock to rehabilitate. The question is cost and expectations." "What expectations?" Ruth asked. "No meaningful commercial increase next season. Some improvement the second year. A stable crop in year 3 if weather, disease, labor, and markets cooperate." Ellis whistled. "If all 4 cooperate, we should buy lottery tickets," Miriam wrote without looking up. "What about propagation?" Carla opened a plastic container holding cut twigs from the strongest trees, plenty of usable scion wood. "You could graft replacement stock, but that extends the timeline." "I'm 71, Ruth said. Carla met her eyes. "Then I won't pretend time is an abstract concern." The room went quiet. Ruth appreciated the honesty and wanted to throw her out for it. Miriam capped her pen. "I'll cover Carla's report." Once soil results come back, I'll prepare estimated rehabilitation costs and a preliminary lease structure. Scott looked at her. Using my mother's land as collateral? No. Taking a lien on the property? No. Then how do you recover investment? Through a production agreement and lease terms. If the crop fails, the contract allocates risk. To whom? That is what contracts do. Scott gave a humorless laugh. That's not an answer. It is the only accurate answer before terms exist. Ruth stood. Her knee protested so sharply that she gripped the table edge. No one moved to help her, which meant they had all seen and were performing not seeing. Carla has samples to deliver, she said. Miriam has figures to prepare. Ellis has my other biscuit. This is finished. Ellis swallowed. I thought nobody wanted it. Ruth walked them out. Scott remained after the others left. He stood beneath the tin awning, reading the sign as though seeing the last line for the first time. Dad wrote that, he said. Yes. I'd forgotten his handwriting leaned backward. He said forward slanting showed desperation. He made that up. He made up most things he said confidently. Scott looked toward the orchard. Red ribbons shifted between the branches. He'd hate seeing those. He hated taking out trees. He'd have done it. Eventually, you would have made him. Ruth considered that. Maybe. Scott put $5 into the coffee can and took a bag. You know you can have apples. I'm supporting local business. That won't cover a pump. I can come back tomorrow. He carried the bag to his truck. Ruth watched him leave, less angry with him than she wished to be. The report arrived 4 days later in a thick envelope. Miriam brought it herself, along with a spreadsheet of estimates. They sat at the kitchen table. The roofer had come the day before and left a ladder against the back of the house. Every few minutes, his assistant crossed the window carrying shingles. $38,000 for the first phase, Ruth said. Estimated. Ruth moved her finger down the page. Tree removal, pruning, disease treatment, deer fencing, irrigation, labor. You'd pay 24 through the business. I'd pay 14 over 2 years from savings or income. We can structure installments. What income? You just told me not to expect a commercial crop next year. Miriam folded her hands. That's why this has to be comfortable for you without optimistic projections. It isn't comfortable. Then we change it or stop. No persuasion. Again. Ruth looked at the roof estimate on the counter. $9,200 if the decking beneath the back slope was sound. More if it was not. The property taxes waited in the upstairs drawer. Numbers had begun gathering around her like relatives after a funeral. What would the lease pay, she asked. $2,000 the first year, increasing with usable acreage, plus your share of fruit sold. It covers taxes, not miracles. At least you don't polish your apples. I spent too long in distribution. Anything polished was usually hiding a bruise. The first year rent would cover less than Ruth hoped and more than the stand could earn in several seasons. The rehabilitation contribution would remove a hard piece of her savings. In exchange, other hands would prune, mow, repair, and harvest. Her land would remain hers, but it would no longer move according to her habits. 10 years is too long, Ruth said. For the investment, it's short. For my age, it's not. Miriam nodded. 7, with renewal options. 5, 6, with a mutual review after 3. They went back and forth until the roofer knocked to report that the decking was not sound. Ruth closed her eyes. Add 3,200, he said apologetically. Of course. After he left, Miriam gathered the papers. Don't decide today. I wasn't going to. Good. I resent how often you approve of me. I can try sighing more. The telephone rang before Ruth could answer. Denise's voice came through tense and clipped. Mom, did you authorize someone to send orchard soil to a lab? Yes. And did you agree to pay $14,000? No. That isn't what Scott heard. Scott heard an estimate. Why didn't you tell me about today's meeting? Because it was my meeting. Miriam looked down at the spreadsheet. Denise continued. I need Miriam's number. No, I already emailed Bell Regional. Ruth straightened. You did what? I asked for documentation. Her business history, insurance, financing, the proposed use, things you should have asked. Denise, I'm not stopping you. I'm making sure this woman is real. Across the table, Miriam's face had gone still. Ruth gripped the receiver. She is sitting in my kitchen. Silence. Then Denise said, Good. Put me on speaker. No. Mom, just put the phone down between you. No. Why are you being difficult? Because you called my house and asked to interview my guest. Miriam's eyes lifted. Denise lowered her voice, which meant she had left the open area of her office and found somewhere private. Ruth pictured the narrow supply room Denise once complained smelled of copier, toner, and peppermint. I am trying to protect you. From what? From signing away access to your own property. I haven't signed anything. You're discussing numbers. That is how people reach a number they might sign. Then what's wrong with asking questions? They are not yours to ask. Denise breathed out slowly. Bell Regional confirmed Miriam sold her interest last year. This new operation doesn't exist yet. There's no company website, no filing I could find under her name, and no proof she has financing. Miriam did not react, though Ruth saw one finger press against the edge of the spreadsheet. Did you call her old company? Ruth asked. I emailed. What did you say? I asked whether she still represented them. She never said she did. Her business card has their name on it. It says former partner. I'm aware. That's why I checked. Some of Denise's questions were good. That irritated Ruth more than if they had all been foolish. Miriam spoke quietly. I'm willing to answer them. Ruth covered the receiver. You don't have to. I know. Denise heard the murmur. Is that her? Ruth moved her hand. Miriam is willing to provide financial information when there is a serious proposal. I will review it. With whom? Someone I choose. Scott should see it. No. Why not? Because he is not entering the lease. He may inherit it. Not if this conversation kills me first. That isn't funny. It wasn't a joke. Miriam looked toward the kitchen window. The roofer's assistant passed carrying a pry bar and carefully avoided looking inside. Denise went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its office sharpness. I'm scared you'll put everything into keeping this place because losing it feels like losing Dad. The sentence found Ruth without armor. She looked at Walter's chair. It had not been his chair until he became sick. Before that, everyone sat everywhere. Illness assigned furniture. This is not about your father, Ruth said. It was partly a lie, and Denise heard it. Then why can't you even sort his clothes? Ruth's hand tightened around the receiver. We are finished. Mom, she hung up. The plastic body of the telephone clicked softly against its cradle. Miriam waited. Ruth sat down and arranged the estimates into a straight stack. She shouldn't have contacted your old company. No. She had no right. No. I'm not confused about your business. You told me it doesn't exist yet. Yes. Ruth looked up sharply. You could offer more than one word. I could. I'm trying not to say the wrong ones. Say the accurate ones. Miriam pulled her satchel onto her lap, but did not open it. Your daughter's questions are reasonable. Her methods aren't. Your son's questions were also reasonable. His assumption that he was entitled to answers wasn't. So we agree. We agree on the facts. What don't we agree on? That facts solve the problem. Ruth pushed the spreadsheet toward her. The problem is a possible lease. We can write that no one except me has authority. A contract already assumes that. Then what more do you need? Miriam rubbed her thumb over the satchel buckle. For the first time since Ruth had met her, she looked tired. I invested in 3 family-owned suppliers at Bell Regional. One ended with 2 brothers padlocking each other out of a cooler. Another had a daughter calling our drivers every morning to tell them her father had changed delivery times when he hadn't. Everyone had documents. Everyone was legally correct about something. My children won't padlock a packing shed. No. They'll question every truck, improvement, payment, and bad harvest because they believe the agreement is dangerous. If something happens to you, they'll inherit their resentment along with the land. They may not inherit it. That threat didn't help, did it? Ruth's face warmed. How did you know? Your daughter wrote that you were making estate decisions under emotional pressure. For a moment, the kitchen became so quiet, Ruth heard shingles sliding down the roof. She told you that? She implied it. Show me. Miriam took out her phone, opened the message, and passed it across the table. Denise's email was polite. That made it worse. She had not called Ruth confused or incompetent. She had written that Walter's recent death had placed significant emotional and financial strain on her mother. She requested that all discussions pause until the family understood the scope of the proposed commitment. She asked for insurance information, financial backing, and professional references. At the bottom, she had signed herself Denise Calder. daughter and concerned family representative. Ruth returned the phone. I did not appoint her. I know, then ignore it. I can ignore an email. I can't ignore the situation it describes. Ruth stood and walked to the sink. Outside, broken shingles lay on a blue tarp like black scales. You told me to act like the owner. You did. And now? Now I'm acting like an investor. The answer came without satisfaction. Miriam put the estimates into her satchel. She left Carla's report on the table. I'm stepping back. For how long? I don't know. Until I make my children behave? They're adults. You can't make them behave. So they win. This isn't a contest. People say that when they're not the one losing. Miriam flinched slightly. Ruth saw it and was glad, then ashamed. I'm sorry, Miriam said. Don't be sorry. Be honest. You don't think I'm worth the trouble. I think the orchard may be. I think you are. I don't think a first-stage business can survive $24,000 of investment on land where the family is preparing for a fight. My family is not part of the agreement. Your family is already part of every meeting we've had. Miriam stood. She hesitated beside Walter's coat in the pantry. For what it's worth, I wanted this to work. It isn't worth much. No, Miriam said. Usually it isn't. She left without stopping at the stand. Ruth watched the station wagon disappear. Then she took Miriam's estimates from beneath Carla's report, folded them once, and put them in the desk drawer with the bills. The roofer came down at 4 and asked for the first payment. Ruth wrote the check carefully because her hand had begun to cramp. Denise called that evening. Ruth let the telephone ring. Scott called. 20 minutes later, she let it ring again. They both arrived Saturday morning. Denise stood at the back door, and Scott waited behind her with his hands in his jacket pockets. They had come together in Scott's truck. Ruth considered not letting them in. Then the kettle whistled, and habit made her step aside. We heard from Miriam, Denise said. That must be nice for you. She only replied that she wasn't proceeding. Correct. Scott remained standing. You signed something? No. Paid anything? No. Then nothing was lost. Ruth poured hot water into her mug. You think something only exists after money changes hands. I think she wanted $14,000. She was going to spend $24,000 on her business, on my trees. Denise set her purse on the counter. If the proposal was sound, reasonable questions wouldn't have killed it. The questions didn't. You inserting yourself did. I identified myself as family. You called yourself my representative. I said, concerned family representative. You represent your concern. You do not represent me. Scott looked at Denise. You didn't tell me that part. Oh, don't start, she said. You called the agronomist. Ruth turned. You did what? Scott's ears reddened. I asked for the report. It wasn't yours. I wanted to see whether Miriam left anything out. Carla told you no? Yes. And then? That was it. Ruth laughed once. There was nothing humorous in the sound. You checked her report. Denise checked her company. You both checked everything except whether I asked you. Scott's voice hardened. Because if we ask, you say no. That is an answer. It's not always a smart one. No, but it is mine. Denise stepped closer. What do you want us to say? That we're sorry the stranger who wanted your savings decided not to take them. I want you to understand that you cost me a choice. You still have choices. Name one you haven't already approved. Denise opened her mouth, then closed it. Ruth pointed toward the door. Go. Mom, not forever, just today. Scott picked up Denise's purse and handed it to her. That small courtesy hurt Ruth more than the argument. They could be gentle. They simply reserved it for each other when she became the common danger. At the door, Scott turned. I do love you. I know. You don't act like you know. Ruth's throat tightened. Neither do you. They left. The roof was finished Monday. It looked clean and dark and unfamiliar. Ruth stood in the yard with the invoice while the roofer explained the warranty. She wrote the final check and watched another section of savings become weather protection. That afternoon, she tried to prune the young trees near the packing shed. The first branch came away cleanly. The second resisted. Her hand seized around the lopper handle, and pain ran into her wrist. She lowered the tool and stood beneath the tree until the cramp released. No one saw. That should have felt like victory. It did not. A pickup stopped at the stand. The mechanic from the county road garage got out in oil-stained coveralls. He bought the last 2 bags and knocked at the kitchen door. You making sauce this year? He asked. Some. My sister wants 6 jars. I only have 4 ready. She'll take 4. He handed Ruth $30 for apples and sauce, refused change, and left with a box tucked against his chest. The amount would not touch the irrigation estimate. Still, Ruth wrote the order on a pad by the telephone. Ellis came by before supper. He found the loppers on the grass and carried them to the porch. Heard Bell backed out, he said. News travels. Scott called me. Of course he did. Ellis sat on the step. You going to sell? No. You going to let the orchard rot to make that answer impressive? Ruth looked at him. He raised both hands. My wife says I should soften my openings. Listen to her. I know somebody you should meet. Tasha Green. Runs the kitchen over at the Ridgeway Conference Center, buys ugly fruit and turns it into things people pay too much for. I don't need a cook. You need people. She needs a place to start smaller than she can afford. Ruth looked toward the stand, empty now, except for the coffee can and Walter's damp sign. What does she want? Ask her. The wind moved through the upper rows. Red ribbons flashed between the thinning leaves. Ruth picked up the order pad. Bring her tomorrow, she said. Tasha Green arrived at 9, carrying a chef's knife and a canvas roll and wearing red rubber boots. Ruth looked at the knife roll, then at Ellis. You said she made preserves. I do, Tasha said. Occasionally I also murder pumpkins. She was 46, square-shouldered, with short twists threaded in gray, and a face that seemed composed even while laughing. She offered Ruth a firm hand, noticed the stiffness in Ruth's fingers, and released without squeezing harder to prove anything. Ellis carried 2 empty milk crates from his truck. What are those for? Ruth asked. Apples. Those are my crates. Then I saved us time. Tasha walked around the stand before coming inside. She read Walter's warning about 2 bags, smiled, and lifted the coffee can. You really leave this out? Most people are honest. How do you know? Somebody paid with a button. That doesn't answer my question. It answered theirs. In the kitchen, Tasha unrolled her knives beside Ruth's order pad and set out 3 small jars. Each held something brownish red. Ruth had expected polished labels. These had masking tape marked with dates and abbreviations. Test batches, Tasha said. Apple butter, chutney, and a smoked apple mustard. Apples don't smoke, not voluntarily. Ellis reached for the nearest jar. Tasha tapped his knuckles with a spoon. Bread first. We are not animals. You brought no bread. I was told there would be biscuits. You ate them yesterday, Ruth said. Ellis looked betrayed by both women. Ruth brought out crackers. Tasha opened the apple butter and watched Ruth taste it with an attention that made lying feel disrespectful. It was darker than Ruth's, less sweet, with a small bitter edge at the end. Too much peel, Ruth said. Tasha nodded. That's what I thought. You thought it and brought it anyway? I need someone who'll say it. People won't? People want free jars. The chutney had onions, mustard seeds, raisins, and enough vinegar to wake the back of Ruth's throat. She liked it better than she intended to. The raisins are unnecessary, she said. They're divisive. They're chewy interruptions. Tasha wrote that down. What did you mark? Chewy interruptions. You can't put that on a label. I might. The mustard was excellent. Ruth tasted it twice and said nothing. Tasha leaned back. That's the one. I didn't say anything. Exactly. Ellis opened the jar and ate some from the tip of a cracker. His eyes watered. It bites. It's mustard, Tasha said. That's employment. She explained that Ridgeway Conference Center bought cases of inexpensive apples every fall for pies, breakfast trays, and cider service. Tasha managed 14 adults in the kitchen and knew exactly how much usable fruit went into the garbage because a bruise looked ugly on a buffet. For 3 years, she had been making small test batches on her own time in a rented commercial kitchen 40 minutes away. She had saved enough to buy kettles and a filling machine, but not enough for a building that met food production requirements. How much have you saved? Ruth asked. Ellis looked at the ceiling. Tasha did not blink. 27,000. How much do you earn? 59 a year. Debt? Car? 9,000. No credit cards. You're answering quickly. I heard you just lost a deal because nobody asked direct questions in the right order. Ruth glanced at Ellis. He examined his cracker. I did not lose a deal, Ruth said. A woman withdrew. Those sound different from opposite sides of a table. Ruth disliked the accuracy. What do you want from me? She asked. First, fruit. Seconds, windfalls that aren't rotten. Smaller apples that won't sell at your stand. I'll pay by weight. How much? Tasha gave a number. Ruth laughed. I said usable windfalls. You said fruit. Your premium fruit can go elsewhere. I'm buying what you leave on the ground. It becomes premium after you put it in a $6 jar. It becomes a $6 jar after I pay for sugar, vinegar, spices, lids, labels, kitchen rental, insurance, transportation, testing, and a person to stand over a kettle hot enough to remove eyebrows. Do you still have eyebrows? Very expensive ones. Ellis began laughing and had to put down his coffee. Tasha offered a higher number for picked seconds and a still higher one for clean Calder Golds that met her preferred sugar level. None of the prices would rescue the orchard. Together, they might turn fruit Ruth could not harvest into several $100s instead of deer food. Who picks? Ruth asked. That's the second conversation. I thought fruit was first. Conversations aren't fruit. You number things too much. I run a kitchen. If I don't number things, 3 people salt the soup. Tasha wanted to inspect the packing shed as a possible future workspace. Not immediately, she emphasized. It had no approved kitchen, no proper drainage, no heat, and likely no electrical capacity for commercial kettles. For now, she would continue renting. If sales grew, she might lease a portion of the shed and pay for improvements according to whatever agreement they negotiated. Ruth watched Ellis very carefully. Did Miriam send you? No, he said. Tasha's eyebrows rose. Who's Miriam? No one, Ruth replied. She's someone, Ellis said, just not currently. They walked to the packing shed. Tasha did not admire it. She measured the west wall with her eyes, looked at the concrete floor, checked the water line, and opened the electrical panel. This belongs in a museum, she said. It works. So does a handsaw. I don't want one inside my fuse box. She examined the loading door, the lane, and the distance to the well. Where Miriam had looked at rows and supply, Tasha looked at movement, where fruit would arrive, where jars would cool, where dirty crates would be washed. Ruth found herself answering questions before she decided to encourage them. Walter's sorting table occupied the center. His pencil marks remained along one edge, recording box counts from a harvest 17 years earlier. Tasha ran one finger near them without touching. This stays, she said. It wasn't offered. I'm telling you where I'd design around it. Ruth looked at her. Tasha shrugged. I don't need to erase a room to use it. The words entered Ruth more deeply than Tasha could have known. Outside, they walked the lower rows. The red ribbons were brighter now, that leaves had begun to fall. Tasha picked up windfalls and cut away damaged sections. She smelled every slice before tasting. These don't collapse when cooked, she said. No, that's useful. Miriam said they hold in storage. Tasha glanced at Ellis. The someone? The currently not someone, he said. Ruth told her the shortened version. Buyer, tests, assessment, proposed lease, family interference, withdrawal. She expected Tasha to express sympathy or anger on Ruth's behalf. Instead, Tasha asked whether Ruth could afford the $14,000. I could. That wasn't the question. Ruth stopped walking. Tasha turned back. There's money a person has and money a person can afford. They aren't twins. The lease paid rent. In the first year, enough to cover taxes. How long to earn back your share? Several years, and your roof just got replaced. Ellis talks too much. I asked why the shingles looked new. Ruth continued downhill. I wasn't going to sign without reviewing it. I didn't say you were. You're speaking like my daughter. I don't know your daughter. That's why you can still leave cheerfully. Tasha laughed, then became serious. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm telling you what I can do. I can buy 2,000 pounds of seconds if we can get them picked and sorted over the next 3 weeks. Maybe more, depending on quality. 2,000? There's that much on the ground. Not usable. Then there's that much within reach. You have ladders? No ladders. Tasha nodded once. Good. Good. People get ambitious around free fruit, and workers' compensation becomes a religious experience. Ellis pointed toward the machine shop beyond the ridge. I can find pickers. I am not having strangers wander through the trees for charity. I didn't say charity. You were about to. I was about to say some of your stand customers might help. For wages. Ruth. For wages. Tasha stepped between the argument without physically moving. How much? Ruth named an hourly rate. Ellis whistled. That's more than you pay me. You spend half your time drinking coffee. I bring the coffee, then you have a separate beverage contract, Tasha calculated on her phone. 6 workers for 1 full day would cost more than Ruth expected. Add crates, lunch, and the price of transporting fruit to the rented kitchen, and Tasha's first purchase would barely cover the labor. It doesn't work, Ruth said. It works if I put down a deposit against the fruit and take the sorting loss, Tasha replied. You cover harvest labor. I provide crates and transport. If we get enough clean seconds, you make something. Not much. How much is not much? Tasha showed her the figures. Ruth studied them. It was not a business plan. It was one Saturday with a chance of paying for itself. Who are the workers? She asked. Ellis began counting on his fingers. Dale from the road garage. He buys every week. Lena drives that pharmacy delivery route. The 2 women from the machine shop, names, Marcy and Joe. You can't hire people you call the 2 women. I know their names now. That's 4. My nephew, Rick. How old? 38. Does he work? When supervised? We have enough people needing supervision. Tasha smiled. I have a dishwasher named Leon who complains through 12-hour shifts but never stops moving. Adult? Ruth asked, 52 and offended by the question. Ruth had no interest in explaining why the answer relieved her. 6. They returned to the stand. A folded $10 bill lay beneath the coffee can with a note written on the back of a gas receipt. Took 1 bag. Extra is for the good ones last week. Tasha read it over Ruth's shoulder. You know who left that? No, they know you. They know apples. Same thing sometimes. Ruth folded the bill and put it in her pocket. They spent the next hour at the kitchen table drafting a 1-page harvest agreement. Tasha insisted on names, hours, lifting limits, ground-picking rules, and no ladders. Ruth insisted lunch be paid separately from wages. Ellis objected to being assigned parking duty until Tasha explained that he could not prune, supervise, sort, and complain simultaneously. I've done it for years, he said. Poorly, Ruth and Tasha answered together. When the page was finished, Tasha put a $500 deposit on the table. Ruth did not touch it. You haven't seen enough fruit. I've seen enough for a trial. What if we don't pick 2,000 pounds? Then the balance changes. What if your products don't sell? That's my loss. What if you decide this is too much trouble? Then I leave with apples I paid for, and you keep your land. The simplicity of it made Ruth suspicious. No 10 years, she said. 1 Saturday, no lawyers, 1 invoice, no family representative. Tasha extended her hand. Owner to owner. Ruth looked at the $500, then at the empty stand. She shook Tasha's hand. The harvest notice went beneath Walter's sign that afternoon. Paid help needed Saturday. Ground picking only. Lunch provided. No charity, no ladders, no nonsense. By evening, 3 people had written their phone numbers on it. The next morning, there were 8. Dale from the garage had added beneath Ruth's last rule, define nonsense. Ruth took the marker from the coffee can and wrote, You'll know when Ellis starts it. At noon, she saw Scott's truck slow at the stand. He did not turn into the drive. He read the notice from his window, then continued down the road. Ruth stood behind the kitchen curtain, wishing he had stopped and relieved that he had not. The telephone rang 5 minutes later. She let it ring twice before answering. Scott said, Are you hiring people to harvest? Yes. Who's Tasha Green? A buyer. There was a pause. Then, more carefully, he asked, Who still owns the orchard? Ruth heard the apology hidden inside the question. I do, she said. I know. This time he sounded as though he meant it. That doesn't mean I think this is safe, Scott said. Ruth leaned against the wall beneath the telephone. There it is. I'm allowed to worry. You're allowed to worry in your own name. Fine. I, Scott Calder, am worried that 6 strangers are going to wander around wet ground with picking poles. No poles. Ladders? No ladders. Power equipment? No. Alcohol? It's 8 in the morning. Saturday. No alcohol. Waivers? Tasha has forms. Insurance? She has a policy for the fruit purchase and temporary workers. I checked. Scott went quiet. Ruth enjoyed it for 3 seconds before guilt spoiled the taste. We've marked the bad ground, she added. Ellis is supervising the rows. Tasha is sorting. I'm paying everyone by the hour. Who is Tasha? She manages the kitchen at Ridgeway Conference Center. She is starting a preserves business. She has $27,000 saved, $9,000 left on her car, no credit card debt, and excellent mustard. You asked about her debt? I learned from my mistakes. A sound escaped him, too brief to identify as laughter. I have picking crates in my warehouse, he said. Plastic, stackable. They were a canceled order. I already have crates. How many? 24. I can bring 20. Are you selling them? No, then no. Mom, they're sitting in a warehouse. So is everything until somebody pays for it. I can lend them. With a return date written down. He sighed. All right. And your name on the bottom. You want a contract for plastic crates? I have become sophisticated. Scott brought 27. He arrived before 7 on Saturday with the crates strapped in his truck and a thermos between his knees. Fog lay low across the orchard. The red ribbons on Carla's condemned trees seemed to float without trunks. Ruth stood beneath the stand's awning, checking names against Tasha's list. Dale from the garage arrived first, wearing new work gloves and an old back brace. Lena parked her pharmacy delivery van by the road. Marcy and Joe came together from the machine shop, carrying folding camp stools they claimed were for lunch, and Ellis claimed proved a poor attitude toward labor. Rick arrived 6 minutes late with a knit cap pulled over his ears. Leon came 9 minutes early and began moving crates before introductions. Tasha brought a box of forms, a digital scale, and 2 trays of egg and cheese biscuits. My wife sent biscuits too, Ellis said. We now have a biscuit surplus. There's no such thing. Ruth put Scott's loan note in a zippered kitchen bag with the worker forms. You staying? She asked him. He looked uphill. If you need another person. I listed 6. You have 6. So I don't need another. Fine. He began unloading crates. Ruth watched him stack them. The job pays $18 an hour. I'm not taking your money, then go home. He stopped with 2 crates in his hands. Seriously? No charity. I'm your son. Then you should be easier to supervise. Tasha walked past carrying the scale. She told you the rate. You working or visiting? Scott looked at her, then at Ruth. Working. Sign the form. He signed. At 8, Tasha gathered everyone beside the shed. She explained which fruit to take, which to leave, and how to turn an apple before lifting so the stems separated cleanly. Ground reach only. No climbing trees, no standing on crates, no throwing fruit unless someone wanted to spend the afternoon making applesauce personally. Ellis assigned rows. Ruth objected to 2 of his assignments. He objected to all 3 of her corrections. Tasha moved Rick to the lower block and sent Scott with Marcy to the middle rows, resolving the disagreement without naming a winner. Where do I go? Ruth asked. Sorting table, Tasha said. I can pick. You can sort faster than anyone here. I can do both. Then you'll do neither well. Ruth drew herself up. Tasha lowered her voice. I need you at the table because nobody else knows which defects store and which spread. That's not a ceremonial job. It was exactly the right thing to say, which made Ruth suspect preparation. She took her place beneath the shed awning. The first crates came in too full. Ruth showed Leon how weight at the top bruised fruit below. The second load included windfalls with broken skin. Ruth rejected nearly half. Tasha cut samples, checked the flesh, and adjusted the sorting categories. Within an hour, the yard developed a rhythm. Crates arrived. Ruth separated clean seconds from sauce fruit and rot. Tasha weighed each category. Ellis drove the utility cart at a speed slow enough to insult him. Dale talked continuously about carburetors. Marcy sang country songs with the words wrong, and Joe corrected her until they were arguing about whether a woman in a 1980s ballad had left on a midnight train or a Greyhound bus. She left both if she had any sense, Ruth called. Joe pointed at her. Thank you. The stand did more business than usual because cars slowed to see the activity. One customer bought a bag, then asked whether help was still needed. Ruth pointed to the notice. Paid positions were filled. I can stay an hour. For what? To help. Why? The woman blinked. Because I buy apples here. That is a commercial relationship. I've also stolen your canning recipe. That is theft. The woman laughed. Then let me work off my sentence. Ruth refused until Tasha suggested adding her to the next scheduled shift if she completed a form and accepted wages. The woman, whose name was Paula and who managed the front desk at a dental clinic, agreed. By noon, 3 more regular customers had asked to join. Ruth wrote their names and numbers on a second sheet. She had believed the stand's customers knew apples. Tasha had been right. They knew her too. Denise arrived during lunch. Her sedan stopped beside the road because the yard was full. She walked toward them carrying 2 foil pans and a package of paper plates. Scott saw her first. His face changed, not into alarm exactly, but readiness. "I brought macaroni and cheese," Denise said. Ellis looked at the pans. "We've got biscuits. It's noon." Biscuits understand time differently. Denise set the food on the sorting table. She looked at the workers sitting on overturned crates, at the scales, forms, marked rows, and bins labeled press, preserves, stand, compost. "You did all this today?" "Most of it happened after breakfast," Ruth said. "I mean, organized it. Tasha did much of that." Tasha stepped forward and offered her hand. "Tasha Green, Denise Calder." "I know." Denise glanced at Scott. "He didn't warn me you were coming," Tasha said. "Ruth mentioned you." Ruth could not tell whether that reassured Denise. "What are you making with the fruit?" Denise asked. "Mustard, apple butter, chutney?" "Sauce, if the soft-grade volume makes sense." "And you're buying it?" "By weight, from Mom, from Ruth." A small correction, quiet, exact. Denise looked at the rented truck back toward the shed. "Do you have somewhere approved to process all this?" "Yes." "Insurance?" "Yes." "Purchase agreement?" Tasha pointed toward the zippered bag. "Signed." Denise's mouth tightened. Ruth waited for the next question. Instead, Denise opened the foil pans. "This needs to be eaten while it's hot." They arranged plates. Denise had brought enough for 20, though Scott had apparently told her 8 people would be present. She stayed standing while everyone served themselves. "Aren't you eating?" Ruth asked. "I have errands. You drove 40 minutes to deliver noodles. It has cheese. That doesn't shorten the road." Denise gave a strained smile. "I thought you might need lunch." "We did, then good." She turned to go. Ruth saw the old reflex in her daughter. Leave before gratitude became vulnerability, before an offered thing could be rejected after acceptance. "You can stay," Ruth said. Denise glanced toward the orchard. "I'm not dressed for it. You don't have to pick. I didn't bring a form." Scott lowered his plate. "You can use mine. That's not how forms work." Tasha pulled a blank one from the bag. Denise looked at it, then at Ruth. "Are you paying me? If you work, you're paying Scott?" $18 an hour, Scott said. "No family discount." For the first time that day, Denise laughed without guarding it. She filled out the form. Ruth assigned her to the stand and order sheet, away from mud and any opportunity to reorganize the harvest. Denise sold 8 bags in 90 minutes, took 3 sauce orders, and rewrote Ruth's price list in larger letters. "You made the 5 look like a dollar sign," Ruth told her. "It is a dollar sign. It looks greedy. You are charging money. We don't need to celebrate it." At 3, the scale showed 1,680 pounds of usable fruit. Less than Tasha's target, but more than Ellis had predicted. Everyone was tired. Leon had stopped complaining, which Tasha said indicated medical danger. Ruth's hand ached from handling fruit, and Scott walked with a muddy streak across one cheek. Tasha wanted one final sweep of the lower rows. Ruth looked at the darkening sky. 30 minutes. They found another 200 pounds before rain began. It came suddenly, cold and heavy. Everyone ran for the shed, carrying half-filled crates. Dale slipped near the drainage ditch, windmilled both arms, and remained upright through luck and profanity. Under the roof, wet adults crowded around the sorting table, laughing too loudly from relief. Water blew through the gap along the west wall. Tasha moved the paperwork. Denise used her own jacket to cover the scale. Ruth stood in the middle of them, soaked from the shoulders down. For 11 months, rain on a harvest day had meant Walter was not there to curse at it. Now 7 voices were cursing on his behalf. The feeling that rose in her was not happiness. It was too crowded and painful for that. They finished with 1,894 pounds. Tasha paid the balance, deducted the deposit, and showed Ruth every figure. After wages and lunch costs, Ruth had made $231, not counting stand sales. Scott accepted his pay envelope. "So, he said, I'm using this to buy your apples." "No, you're using it to buy something you need." "I need apples." "You have a bag in your truck." "Then mustard." "Tasha's mustard costs more." "I made $36. Capitalist." He kissed her cheek, not her head. Denise accepted her envelope too. She folded it into her wallet beside several credit cards. One with a bright red strip Ruth did not recognize. For an instant, Denise's expression tightened at something only she could see. Then it was gone. Tasha loaded the fruit. Before closing the truck, she handed Ruth a printed sales sheet. Ridgway agreed to trial 48 jars if the kitchen tests pass. 48 isn't much. It's more than zero. The truck pulled out after dark. The yard became quiet, one vehicle at a time. Ruth found a folded $5 bill beneath the coffee can. On it, Scott had written, "One bag, honor system." She smoothed the bill on Walter's sorting table. At the bottom of the hill, headlights slowed. Miriam's blue station wagon stopped beside the empty stand. She sat there long enough to read the harvest notice. Then she looked toward the lit packing shed, where Ruth stood among the crates. Miriam raised one hand through the windshield. Ruth raised hers. The station wagon moved on without turning into the drive. The light in the packing shed burned until almost midnight because Ruth was too tired to walk back to the house. She sat on an overturned crate with the $5 bill in her hand and listened to rain strike the roof. Water gathered beneath the west wall. The harvest had left mud across the floor, apple leaves in the corners, and a smell of cold fruit even after the fruit was gone. $231. She had paid a roofer more than that to remove damaged nails. Still, nearly 1,900 pounds of apples were not rotting beneath the trees. 8 adults had been paid. Tasha had a product to make. Scott and Denise had worked under rules they had not written. Ruth put the bill in the coffee can and carried it to the house. Her knee stiffened overnight. By morning, she had to sit on the edge of the bed before standing. Every stare reminded her that Scott's fear was not entirely invented. She hated that truth less than she once had. It remained a poor excuse for taking over her life. Tasha returned 4 days later with steam burns on one forearm and 12 labeled jars packed in a wine box. "The kitchen tests passed," she said. "The mustard attacked you?" Apple butter, kettle burped. "That sounds unsanitary. The food stayed in the kettle. My dignity did not." She spread the jars across the kitchen table. The apple butter was smoother this time, with less peel. Tasha had removed the raisins from half the chutney and marked those lids Ruth version. "You don't have to name it that. I almost wrote chewy interruption free. That would sell. People like conflict." The mustard had mellowed after cooking, but kept its bite. Ridgway's purchasing manager had approved 48 jars for the conference center's retail shelf and asked whether Tasha could provide small portions for 3 holiday dinners. "How many jars is that?" Ruth asked. "Potentially 300, not promised." "How much fruit?" "Less than you hope. Preserves concentrate value because they use a lot of everything except the main ingredient." "That sounds dishonest." "It's cooking." Tasha slid a check across the table for an additional fruit purchase. $112. Ruth read it twice. "You already paid." "For the harvested fruit. These are the stand-grade apples you let me take after everyone left." "I thought those were samples." "So did I." Then Ridgway accepted the mustard. The check would not restore 6 acres. It would pay Ellis for several days of winter pruning. Tasha opened a notebook filled with figures. "If the trial sells, I can book the rented kitchen 2 Saturdays a month through winter. Next fall, I need my own place or I stay tiny." "You mean my shed?" "I mean a shed. Yours has advantages. It also has a wall that leaks. Walls can learn." "Not that one." Tasha smiled. "I ran numbers on basic conversion, drainage, washable surfaces, sinks, electrical, heat, ventilation. It's ugly." "How ugly?" "Prettier than building from the ground up." She turned the notebook. The estimate was more than Ruth's pump and less than the orchard rehabilitation. Tasha proposed paying for equipment and part of the interior improvements in exchange for reduced rent during the first 2 years. Ruth would fund structural work that remained with the building. "You have $27,000, Ruth said. 26 now. Kitchen rental and testing cost money, and you'd put most of it in a building you don't own, not without a lease. For how long?" 5 years, with renewal options. "Everybody wants years from me. Years are where businesses happen. They're also where people die." Tasha's face did not soften with pity. "Yes." Ruth looked at the jars between them. "What happens if I do? My lease continues under whoever owns the property, unless we negotiate a termination clause. My children would love that. Do they want the shed? They want nothing here until someone else wants it." Tasha closed her notebook. "You don't have to decide. I'm showing you the shape." Miriam had used nearly the same phrase about possibilities. Ruth wondered whether business people attended a school where they learned to leave proposals on kitchen tables and depart before hope could embarrass itself. "Do you know Miriam Bell?" she asked. Tasha tilted her head. "Bell Regional." "Miriam? Yes, I met her twice. She negotiated Ridgway's produce contract before she sold her share. She remembers everyone's volume better than they do. She wanted to lease the orchard. Tasha absorbed that without visible surprise. And now she doesn't. She drove past Saturday. A lot of people drove past. She stopped. "You waved. You saw? I was securing 2,000 pounds of fruit. I saw weather in Canada." Ruth looked at the telephone. "You want me to call her?" Tasha said. "No." "Good. That would be awkward. You could be more supportive. I'm supporting you, not using me as bait." Ruth called Miriam after Tasha left. "I saw lights in the shed," Miriam said. "No greeting?" "Hello, Ruth." "I saw lights in the shed. We harvested. I gathered that from the adults running through rain with apples. Nobody was running with apples. A man in a back brace was. That was Dale. He had an empty crate. Then your safety procedures were excellent." Ruth picked at a loose edge on Tasha's label. "We paid everyone. I assumed you would." "Tasha bought 1,894 pounds. I know Tasha, so she says. I didn't send her, so she says." Miriam laughed softly. "Did you call to accuse me of arranging competent women around you?" "I called because 10 years is too long." The laughter ended. "I agree," Miriam said. "Now." Ruth sat straighter. "Why?" "Because I underestimated the family risk and overestimated how much capital I should tie up before proving demand." "That sounds like you're explaining why nothing changed." "I also underestimated you." Ruth disliked the warmth that moved through her. "In which direction?" "You organized a paid harvest 4 days after I withdrew. Tasha organized much of it. You let her." The words touched the same raw place as Tasha's willingness to design around Walter's table. Ruth had spent months hearing that accepting help proved she could no longer run things. Miriam made it sound like running things. "I have a different proposal," Ruth said. "I'm listening." Not on the phone. They met in the packing shed 2 days later. Ruth included Tasha and Ellis because she had begun to understand that excluding people was not the same as holding authority. Miriam brought no map. Tasha brought her notebook. Ellis brought coffee and no biscuits, which everyone treated as a personal failure. Ruth stood at Walter's sorting table. 3 years, she said. 6 acres, but rehabilitation happens in stages. Lower block first. We agree on a spending limit before either side commits. Miriam leaned against a post. 3 years isn't enough to recover major improvements. Then don't make major improvements until the crop proves them necessary. The irrigation is already necessary. Replace the lower lines. Not the entire system. The pump? Year 2 if we need the upper slope. Miriam glanced at Ellis. He nodded reluctantly. Could use municipal water for the lower rows in a dry season. Expensive, but less than a pump nobody knows they need, Ruth continued. Tasha buys seconds and operates preserves production from the shed when it's ready. She pays rent. You have first rights to commercial-grade fruit, but not every apple. The stand stays. Was that in danger? Miriam asked. It is now in the proposal. Tasha laid out how preserved sales could use fruit unsuitable for pressing or storage, reducing waste without competing for the best crop. Miriam questioned her about licensing, distribution, margins, and production capacity. Tasha answered directly, except when Miriam asked for a 5-year projection. I can project anything for 5 years, Tasha said. Would you like fiction or fantasy? I prefer cautious fiction. Ruth watched them argue over jar volume and storage space. For the first time, the orchard's future was not a choice between saving everything and selling everything. It was 6 acres, 1 wet wall, staged irrigation, a sorting table that stayed where it was. Miriam finally turned to Ruth. Your contribution? Structural repairs to the shed and part of orchard labor, capped at $8,000 the first year. That's still significant. I know what I have. And what you can afford? Tasha already asked me that. She's intrusive. I like her. Tasha wrote something in her notebook. Historical record. Miriam walked to the open door and looked toward the road. 3 years, with an option to renew for another 3. We share approved rehabilitation costs. I need commercial access during agreed hours and the ability to install removable equipment. No trucks before 7 or after 6. Harvest may run later, by written exception. No parking near the house. Use the lower yard. If I agree, I want an attorney to draft terms. My attorney. Separate attorneys. Ruth had not had an attorney since Walter's estate closed. The thought of paying one made her jaw ache. Separate, she agreed. Miriam turned from the door. And your children? They receive written notice of the final terms. Before signing? Yes. Can they attend negotiations? No. Can they contact me? They can contact anyone. You don't have to answer. Tasha looked at Ruth over the notebook. Ellis looked into his coffee. Miriam said, that boundary will have to survive more than this room. I know. They agreed to develop a non-binding 3-year proposal. Nothing was saved. No tree was pruned. No wall repaired itself. Yet when Miriam unrolled the aerial map again, Ruth felt the orchard move 1 inch away from ending. Preparing the shed estimate required clearing the storage room along its north side. Ruth asked Scott to move the heavy cabinets, not because he was her son, but because his warehouse had a pallet jack. He came the following Saturday with 2 workers from his company, both adults, both on payroll. Ruth insisted on seeing the invoice before they began. Scott handed her 1 marked family rate. That sounds suspicious, she said. It's the regular rate with me doing the paperwork free. Paperwork is labor, then buy me mustard. They moved crates, old sprayer parts, and stacks of warped cardboard. Behind a metal cabinet, Scott found 3 narrow notebooks swollen with damp. Dad's? He asked. Ruth recognized the green covers, pruning records. Scott opened the first. Walter's handwriting leaned backward across the pages. Dates, row numbers, grafts, disease, weather. Scott read silently until his thumb stopped halfway down a page. R grafted 19. R chose north stock. R saved row 6 after freeze. He turned several pages. R pruned while W repaired pump. R says remove 3. R was right. Scott looked at Ruth. He wrote you into all of it. I was there. I thought these were his records. They were. No. Scott touched the page. I mean, I thought the orchard was his. Ruth looked around the shed Walter had built, at the wall Tasha hoped to change, and the table she had refused to remove. So did most people, she said. Scott closed the notebook carefully. Did you? He asked. Ruth thought of every time she had called it Walter's orchard, because correcting people took energy. Every decision hidden inside a marriage until even her children could no longer see who made it. Sometimes, she said. That was the worst part. Scott opened the notebook again. The men from his warehouse were rolling the second cabinet toward the loading door. Its wheels rattled over the cracked concrete, too loud for the small silence between mother and son. Why didn't you tell us? He asked. Tell you what? That you did all this. You saw me do it. I saw you helping Dad. Ruth looked at the rows of figures. Walter had recorded her labor, but even his phrasing made it sound temporary. R helped thin South Block. R helped with grafts. She had chosen the grafts, ordered the rootstock, and spent 2 weeks binding them while Walter rebuilt the pump. Helping is what people call work when a wife does it, she said. Scott winced. That was unfair. No, it wasn't. I meant to Dad. Your father knew, mostly. He just enjoyed being the person people asked. Why did you let them? It was easier. Scott looked toward the men moving the cabinet. And then, it wasn't. Ruth took the notebook from him and brushed dried mud from the cover. No. He nodded. The apology arrived gradually in his face before he found words for it. I treated you like you were standing next to his life. Ruth's eyes burned. She hated crying in sheds. It made every smell stronger. You treated me like I had survived him, but not inherited myself. Scott sat on the edge of Walter's table. I'm sorry. It was not polished enough to be a performance. Ruth placed the notebook beside him. Carry those to the house when you finish. All 3? They belong somewhere dry. I meant, are you letting me read them? Yes. He swallowed. Okay. The men stopped work at noon. Scott paid them from his company account and gave Ruth the invoice. Before leaving, he unloaded the toolbox he had carried on the day Miriam first came. These were Dad's, he said. I know. I took them to clean them up. You said you were going to. I don't think I actually asked. No. He set the box inside the shed. The tools were oiled, organized, and labeled in Scott's neat block printing. Walter would have objected to the labels and then used them. I'll come next Saturday, Scott said. If you want help on the ground, this is not penance. I know. And it doesn't make the lease yours. I know. You'll be paid if the work is commercial. He smiled. I know. She wanted to tell him to stop saying that. This time, she let him. The first draft arrived from Miriam's attorney at 27 pages, proving Ruth's suspicion that lawyers could make 6 acres larger than 18. Ruth hired Caroline Price, who had handled Walter's estate and charged by the hour in increments short enough to make breathing seem billable. Caroline crossed out whole paragraphs and wrote unreasonable in the margin 6 times. Miriam's attorney returned the document with new language. Tasha received her own agreement for the packing shed, tied to the orchard trial, but protected if Miriam withdrew. Structural work belonged to Ruth. Tasha's equipment remained Tasha's. The sorting table remained exactly where it stood, unless Ruth approved moving it. After 3 weeks, the agreements had become accurate enough to frighten everyone. Ruth mailed copies to Denise and Scott with a note. These are for information, not consent. Questions may be sent to me. Do not contact Miriam, Tasha, or their representatives. Scott called that evening. I have questions. Send them to me. I wrote them down. Good. Caroline already answered 2. You called Caroline? The agreement lists her as your counsel. I asked if she represented the family, and she said she represented you. Then she billed you for 6 minutes. Ruth closed her eyes. I'm billing you for 7. I'll bring cash Saturday. Denise did not call. Her silence stretched through 4 days. Ruth checked the telephone twice to ensure the ringer worked, then became angry with herself for checking. On the 5th day, Denise arrived at 6 in the evening, carrying the lease in a red folder. She had marked it with colored tabs. Scott's truck followed her into the drive. You called him? Ruth asked. He called me, Denise said. Scott came in with takeout containers from a barbecue restaurant. I thought food might keep everyone seated. It didn't work with pot roast, Ruth said. This has sauce. He unpacked brisket, beans, cornbread, and 3 sets of plastic utensils. Denise placed the red folder beside her plate, but did not eat. Ruth opened the beans. If we're going to argue, I'd like 3 bites first. No one spoke until she took the 3rd. Denise opened the folder. The lease gives Miriam commercial access 6 days a week, between 7 and 6, except during approved harvest extensions, approved by me. It permits outside workers, insured workers. It allows removable improvements, nothing structural without written approval. And if you die, the agreement continues. Ruth put down her fork. Yes, that means Scott and I inherit restricted property. It means you may inherit income-producing property with maintained acreage, or 3 years of disputes. The initial term is 3 years. If I die during it, you can choose not to renew. Denise looked at Scott. You're fine with this? He chewed, swallowed, and wiped his mouth. It isn't my decision. That's not what I asked. I think the new version is better than the first. You think you understand it because you found some notebooks. Scott's face changed. What does that mean? It means you've decided Mom built the orchard too, so now every concern is disrespect. She did build it. I know that. No, we didn't. Speak for yourself. Ruth raised her hand. Stop. Denise flipped to another tab. $8,000. That's her maximum contribution in year 1, not including structural repairs to the shed. I can read. Then you know it could be more. The shed roof and west wall are mine, whether Tasha leases it or not. You were not planning to repair them. I was planning to postpone them. That is not the same. What happens if the crop fails and Tasha's jars don't sell? Then the trial ends, and you lose money. Yes. Denise stared as though the admission offended her. Ruth leaned forward. There is no version where I keep this place without spending money. Selling is not the only decision with a cost. It's the only one that gives you security. It gives me cash. That is security. Sometimes. Denise's hand moved toward her purse. Ruth remembered the red-striped credit card in her wallet at the harvest. Is that what this is about? Ruth asked. Denise went still. What? Cash. Scott looked between them. What are you talking about? Nothing, Denise said. Ruth waited. Denise closed the folder. Don't do that. Do what? Stare at me until silence becomes a confession. I learned it from you. You didn't learn anything from me. The words came with more force than the conversation required. Denise stood and walked to the sink. She turned on the water, although there were no dishes. Scott said her name. Don't. How much? Ruth asked. Denise gripped the counter. How much what? Scott said. Ruth kept her eyes on her daughter. Debt. Denise's shoulders dropped. The water ran. Scott shut it off. 38, Denise said. Ruth thought she meant 100 until Scott's face made the number clear. 38,000? He asked. 41 with the card I used for Dad's travel. I paid that one down. Ruth's stomach tightened. What travel? Hotels during treatment, gas, meals. The times I came up midweek. You told us work reimbursed mileage. It did twice. Why didn't you say anything? Because you were dealing with enough. Scott stared at her. That was 2 years ago. It wasn't all Dad. I'm not saying it was. The truth came out in ordinary pieces. Denise's condo association had assessed $12,000 for roof and masonry repairs. Her car transmission failed the same month. She moved balances between promotional cards, then interest rates rose. She kept paying, kept dressing for work, kept bringing salads in glass bowls as if proper containers could prevent collapse. How far behind are you? Ruth asked. I'm current. That wasn't the question. I can make minimums. Scott rubbed both hands over his face. Why didn't you tell me? Because you do this. Do what? Look at me like I set my house on fire. Ruth understood then why Denise had heard the farm's value in every conversation about safety. She had not plotted to steal an inheritance. She had begun spending it in her mind because imagining eventual relief made monthly statements bearable. You thought I would sell, Ruth said. Denise's eyes filled. I thought eventually, when you were ready. And my share would clear it, Scott said. I didn't count yours. That's generous. Stop, Ruth said. Denise picked up her purse. Forget it. No, I shouldn't have said anything. You should have said it before bringing a buyer to my house. Denise flinched. Ruth softened her voice. I am not selling the farm to pay your cards. I didn't ask you to. You asked without saying why. I wanted you safe. I believe you. You also wanted the money. Both things can be true. Denise turned away. Ruth continued. I will sit with you and go through every statement. We can find a reputable credit counselor. You may need to sell the condo or change how you live. Now you're managing me. Yes, Ruth said. It's infuriating, isn't it? Scott made a sound that might have been a laugh, then wisely turned it into a cough. Denise looked at Ruth. Something reluctant moved across her face. I don't want your money. I didn't offer it. That was unnecessarily clear. Clarity is our new family hobby. They sat again. The barbecue had gone cold. Ruth showed them the first-year budget, including the roof payment, taxes, and her emergency reserve. She did not reveal every account. A boundary did not require nudity. Scott asked about insurance. Denise asked what happened if rehabilitation exceeded the cap. Ruth answered when she knew, and marked questions for Caroline when she did not. At the end, Denise touched the red folder. I still think 3 years is too much. So does Miriam. For different reasons. But I won't contact her. Thank you. I'm not approving it. You're not being asked. Denise almost smiled. You make gratitude difficult. I have hobbies too. Scott packed the leftovers. Before leaving, Denise paused at the stand. The night was cold enough that no apples remained outside, only Walter's sign beneath the awning. You're keeping this? She asked. Yes, even if the other operation starts. Yes. Denise ran a finger along the softened cardboard edge. The 5 looks like a dollar sign. It looks greedy. It looks legible. She straightened the sign and stepped back. What happens if you need us? She asked. Ruth considered promising she would not. The old answer rose quickly, proud and useless. I'll ask, she said. Denise nodded. It was not forgiveness. It was better. It was a term both of them might be able to keep. Caroline insisted that Ruth sign the agreements in her office. Neutral location, she said. My kitchen is neutral. Your kitchen contains your children, your husband's coat, and a telephone people use to interfere. The coat has never interfered. It's still not neutral. Caroline's office occupied the second floor of a converted brick house above a tax preparer. The conference table was too glossy, the chairs were too low, and someone had placed a bowl of decorative wooden pears in the center. Those aren't even apples, Ruth said. Miriam looked at the bowl. I can withdraw. Tasha picked up 1 pear and inspected the price sticker still attached to its bottom. We could leave now and still have a productive day. They signed anyway. Ruth's hand cramped near the end of the orchard lease. She set down the pen, flexed her fingers, and waited. No one offered to finish a task they could not finish for her. When the pain eased, she signed the packing shed agreement with Tasha and initialed the final page. 3 years. Miriam would fund stage rehabilitation and retain first purchase rights to commercial fruit. Ruth would contribute no more than $8,000 in the first year without a separate written agreement. Traffic stayed in the lower yard. The farmhouse remained private. Tasha would lease the packing shed, pay increasing rent after the first year, and own every piece of equipment she installed. Walter's sorting table could be moved only with Ruth's approval. Caroline collected the copies. "Congratulations," she said. "For what?" Ruth asked. "Paying 4 adults to disagree until the disagreement became enforceable." They celebrated with coffee from a paper cup in the parking lot. The first trees came down 11 days later. Ruth had approved all 31 removals. She had read Carla's notes, walked the rows with Ellis, and marked her own list. Still, when the saw bit into the tree Walter had grafted the year Denise moved out, Ruth stepped behind the shed where no one could see her. The trunk fell with less drama than its life deserved. Miriam found Ruth near the waterline. "We can stop," she said. "No, we don't have to do all of them today." "Yes, we do." Miriam stood beside her. The saw started again. "People think letting go feels peaceful," Ruth said. "People say many things after the difficult portion is over." Ruth looked at her. "What did your wife leave behind?" "A closet full of shoes I couldn't touch for 4 years. 4? Then I gave away the practical ones and kept the ridiculous ones." "What makes a shoe ridiculous?" "Silver heels." She wore them to grocery stores. Ruth pictured Miriam beside a woman who bought produce in silver shoes. It made her feel unexpectedly less alone. They milled usable trunks into rough boards for shelves and chipped diseased wood separately. Ruth kept one sound section from the tree by the fence. She did not know what she would do with it. Tasha labeled it "not firewood" in red paint. The west wall of the packing shed came apart next. Behind the siding, the studs showed water damage and an abandoned mouse nest, large enough to suggest ambition. The estimate increased by $1,800. Ruth approved the change after Caroline confirmed it fell under structural work. "You could postpone the floor drain," Tasha said. "The drain is required. I can cover more of the wall." "No, the wall stays with the building." Tasha studied her. "You know accepting cost sharing is not charity." "I know. You said that like Scott. Leave." Tasha did not leave. She made coffee on a hot plate and showed Ruth the first printed labels for Calder Gold apple mustard. "My name is too large. It's the apple's name. People will think I made it. Do you want your name smaller or your picture on the jar?" Ruth took the labels home to think. By January, the shed had washable walls, 3 stainless steel sinks, new wiring, heat, and a west side that did not breathe during storms. Walter's table stood where it always had, scarred and uneven among all the bright surfaces. Tasha's first production day began at 5 in the morning. Steam covered the windows. Leon operated the filling machine while complaining that jars had been invented by enemies. Tasha hired Marcy from the machine shop for weekend labeling and paid her from the first Ridgeway order. Ruth kept walking in to ask if anyone needed anything. Finally, Tasha handed her a hair covering and a clipboard. "You can record batch temperatures. I know how to use a thermometer. That confidence is why I chose you." Ruth stayed 6 hours. The winter pruning crew began in February. Scott arrived on the first Saturday wearing expensive insulated overalls and carrying Walter's restored tools. Ellis pointed toward the lower rows. "You're clearing suckers. I know how to prune. You know how to nearly kill a lilac. That was 20 years ago. The lilac remembers." Scott looked at Ruth for rescue. "You're under Ellis," she said. "I'm 43. Then this humiliation should be developmentally appropriate." He cleared suckers for 7 hours. Ruth paid him. The next month, he returned without the expensive overalls and took instructions before offering opinions. Denise came less often at first. She called every Sunday evening, usually while Ruth was eating. Their conversations lasted 12 cautious minutes and avoided money, leases, and Walter's clothes. Then, one Sunday, Denise asked Ruth to sit with her at the kitchen table and look through the credit card statements. The stack was thicker than the orchard agreement. Ruth did not pay them. She did not offer. They called a nonprofit credit counselor, cut up 2 cards, and built a plan that required Denise to sell her sedan and use a smaller car. Denise cried after the counselor left, not because of the vehicle, but because shame had lost its privacy. I'm 46, she said. Debt does not check identification. I should know better. You do know better. Knowledge has never stopped a person from making an expensive month. Denise laughed through her tears. That sounds like Dad. Your father once bought a second-hand sprayer without checking whether it fit between the rows. What did you do? Reminded him annually until he died. The first spring blossoms came heavy in the lower block and thin above the pond. New grafts took on 22 young trees. The repaired irrigation lines held. Ruth walked the rows every morning, touching leaves as though they might report overnight decisions. Then a late frost burned half the blossoms brown. Miriam arrived before sunrise with temperature records. Ellis came an hour later and stood beneath the trees, hands in his pockets. How bad? Ruth asked. Too early, he said. I have eyes. Then why are you asking me? Because yours complain professionally. Carla assessed the damage. The lower rows retained enough fruit for a small crop. 2 middle rows lost nearly everything. 1 cluster marked yellow. The previous autumn failed to leaf properly after winter. They removed 7 more trees. Miriam's first pressing season produced less than half her cautious estimate. Tasha used every usable second, but bought additional apples from another farm to fill her holiday orders. Ruth objected until Tasha reminded her that a business depending on one orchard was not a business. It was a weather hostage. The first rent payment covered Ruth's property tax installment and left enough to pay Ellis. No miracle arrived. The stand had its best season because passing customers stopped to ask about the activity in the shed. Ruth raised the price of clean bags to $7 and felt guilty for 3 weeks. She kept the bruised fruit at $5. Scott bought both and accused her of market segmentation. Miriam's first bottled cider was sharp and cloudy. Ruth liked it. The tasting room she rented in town sold modestly on weekends. The press motor failed after 6 weeks, consuming most of Miriam's equipment reserve. They argued about gravel in November. Heavy deliveries had rutted the lower lane. Miriam wanted to widen it by 4 feet and remove an old lilac near the packing shed. No, Ruth said. Trucks can't make the turn. They made it all fall. They tore up the ditch, then used smaller trucks. Smaller trucks cost more. So does removing things. The lilac is half dead. It's not part of the orchard lease. It's blocking commercial access. The access you approved did not include the lilac. Miriam placed both hands on Walter's sorting table. This operation cannot be designed around every object your husband touched. He didn't plant that. Who did? Scott. Badly. Miriam stared at her. He was 23, Ruth added. Walter made him move it twice. Of course he did. They compromised on 3 feet and a reinforced shoulder instead of a full widening. The lilac stayed. Ruth paid part of the gravel because the lane belonged to her. Watching the machines reshape the ditch felt worse than she expected. It also prevented delivery drivers from backing across her lawn. That winter, Ruth slipped on the second stair. She caught the banister and bruised her elbow. No one witnessed it. She told Scott anyway. He arrived with catalogs for handrails and began describing a downstairs bedroom before taking off his coat. I told you what happened, Ruth said, not what to do. He stopped. The pause cost him something. What do you want to do? He asked. Ruth looked toward Walter's old downstairs room, now used for boxes and Tasha's spare labels. Move the boxes, she said, and show me the least ugly handrail. Denise helped choose paint. Scott installed rails where Ruth marked them. The upstairs bedroom remained hers, but she moved clothing downstairs and began sleeping there on nights when her knee hurt. The first night, she cried into Walter's old pillow because adaptation felt too much like defeat. By the third night, she appreciated not climbing stairs to use the bathroom. The second orchard season began with better blossoms and worse rain. Disease spread through 1 middle row despite treatment. Miriam wanted to remove it. Ruth delayed for 2 weeks, then walked the row with Carla and authorized the work. You're sure? Carla asked. No, Ruth said. Do it anyway. That was the surrender no one had explained. Not giving up the orchard, but giving up the belief that keeping it required preserving every version of it. The remaining trees produced well enough to repay part of the rehabilitation costs. Tasha's mustard reached 6 independent grocery stores. Her chutney without raisins outsold the original by 3 to 1, a result Ruth mentioned whenever Tasha became overconfident. Scott continued 1 Saturday a month. Ellis still directed him and occasionally assigned pointless work to preserve the hierarchy. Denise brought lunch, but no longer arrived with bins. She sold her sedan, entered a structured repayment plan, and stopped asking what the land was worth. Miriam and Ruth learned to disagree without mistaking it for withdrawal. As the final spring of the trial approached, the 6 acres looked different: wider canopies, younger grafts, empty spaces where diseased trunks had stood. The orchard was healthier and less familiar. Renewal still depended on the third crop. A warm March brought buds too early. Then the forecast showed 3 nights below freezing. Miriam brought frost cloth for the youngest grafts. Ellis organized wind machines borrowed from a neighboring grower. Scott offered to stay overnight. Ruth told him to sleep in the house rather than his truck and tried not to notice his surprise. At 2 in the morning, she walked the lower lane with Miriam. Portable lights made the trees cast long, restless shadows. Cold gathered in the low ground. "If we lose half again," Ruth asked, "we press what survives. And the renewal, we decide with real numbers." "That sounds like a no." "It sounds like I won't promise in an orchard." Ruth pulled her coat tighter. The stand waited by the road, empty for winter, its sign stored safely in the shed. A wind machine started above them. Air rolled down the slope, carrying the smell of fuel and opening buds. Ruth looked across 6 acres she could no longer claim to manage alone. "Turn the second one toward the north block," she said. Miriam lifted her radio and gave the instruction. This time, Ruth did not need to be the person holding every tool to know the decision was hers. The temperature reached 28 degrees just before dawn. Frost silvered the grass beneath the trees. The wind machines pushed warmer air down the slope in slow, roaring waves. But the lowest pockets remained dangerously still. Scott slept for 40 minutes in Walter's old downstairs room, then returned wearing 2 different gloves. Miriam checked thermometers. Ellis stood by the pond with a radio and complained that borrowed machinery always contained someone else's bad decisions. At 4:30, headlights appeared at the road. Denise came up the lane carrying coffee and a box of breakfast sandwiches. "I didn't know what anyone eats at this hour," she said. "Food," Ellis replied. Generally, Denise handed Ruth a cup. Scott texted. He was supposed to be sleeping. He sent one word: frost. That is almost efficient. They waited together beneath the packing shed awning. Tasha arrived before sunrise and opened the kitchen so everyone could get warm. Steam from the kettles clouded the windows while pale light spread over the orchard. The young grafts looked undamaged. Several lower trees had browned blossoms. Carla would not assess them for 2 days because, as she reminded Ruth over the telephone, looking sooner would not change the cells. Ruth walked the rows anyway. By noon, she had convinced herself they had lost everything. By evening, she believed nearly all had survived. The truth, when Carla delivered it, was less dramatic and more useful. They had lost roughly 20% of the potential crop. "Can you press what survives?" Ruth asked Miriam. "If June doesn't produce hail, July doesn't produce drought, August doesn't produce disease, and September doesn't produce a new way to punish us. So, yes." Miriam smiled. "So maybe." The surviving blossoms set fruit. Spring moved into summer by inches. Petals on wet grass, then small green apples, then branches lowering under weight. The repaired irrigation carried them through a dry July. Tasha signed orders for mustard and apple butter beyond what Ruth's seconds could supply, then bought ordinary fruit elsewhere without apologizing. Calder Golds remained on the front of the labels because the flavor mattered, not because the orchard supplied every apple in every jar. Ruth learned to accept that truth after objecting 3 times. "You want a business or a shrine?" Tasha finally asked. "A truthful label. It is truthful. It's enthusiastic. That is a label's job." The third harvest began under a clear September sky. The paid crew had grown to 12 adults working in 2 shifts. Paula from the dental clinic managed forms and timesheets. Leon supervised crate washing, while complaining that promotion had separated him from honest suffering. Marcy had left the machine shop and now worked 3 days a week in Tasha's kitchen during production seasons. Ellis no longer lifted pruning tools above his shoulder. He had begun carrying a long pointing stick, which Scott called his royal staff. "I use it for instruction," Ellis said. "You use it to point at work other people should do. That is instruction." Scott came one Saturday each month, more during harvest. He still worked under Ellis and accepted wages when the labor was commercial. He no longer photographed diseased trees unless Carla requested it. He had become good at removing suckers and mediocre at thinning fruit, a balance everyone agreed prevented arrogance. Denise handled the stand on busy afternoons. Her larger price signs had finally won. Clean bags cost $7. Sauce in jars carried proper labels and prices that made Ruth uncomfortable, but did not prevent sales. One basket remained $5. It held blemished Calder Golds beneath a smaller version of Walter's warning. Please don't honor yourself to 2 bags. The third crop yielded enough fruit to keep Miriam's press operating for 6 weeks. Not all at once, not all perfectly. One delivery spoiled after a refrigeration failure, and several hundred pounds went to compost. A bearing failed in the sorting equipment. Rain delayed picking for 3 days, then every available hand worked late to catch up. When the final weights were entered, the 6 acres had produced a little over 29,000 pounds of usable fruit. Miriam brought the figures to Ruth's kitchen. The trial worked, Ruth said. The 3rd year worked. That is the last year of the trial. It's also the 1st year with a stable crop. Are you about to make success sound disappointing? I'm trying to prevent you from doubling the rent. I was thinking 15%. Miriam laughed. You were thinking 10. I became ambitious while you were speaking. They negotiated a 3-year renewal with a smaller rehabilitation contribution from Ruth, increased rent, and money set aside from fruit sales for tree replacement. Miriam's cider had found steady regional buyers, but had not become famous. Tasha's preserves employed 4 adults year-round, and 6 more seasonally. The packing shed remained busy without becoming a factory. Ruth's orchard income paid the property taxes, routine maintenance, and hired help. Some years it left extra. Some years the pump or roof found a use for the extra before Ruth did. She did not become rich. She became difficult to remove. Caroline reviewed the renewal and again insisted on her office. This time, Ruth refused. They signed at Walter's sorting table. The table's surface had been cleaned but not refinished. His old pencil marks remained beneath the signatures. Tasha brought mustard and bread. Ellis brought biscuits 4 hours late. Scott and Denise attended as guests. Neither was asked to sign. After Miriam initialed the last page, she looked toward them. Any questions? Scott shook his head. Denise said, Several. Ruth waited. But they're for Mom. Miriam handed Ruth the pen. The difference was small enough that no one outside the room would have understood why it mattered. Ruth signed. That winter, she sorted Walter's clothes, not all at once. Denise helped with shirts. Scott took the heavy canvas coat from the pantry hook, put it on, and discovered the sleeves were too short. Dad had short arms, he said. You have long complaints. Can I keep it? Ruth had imagined preserving the coat until fabric surrendered on its own. Instead, she buttoned it over Scott's stomach and smoothed the collar. It needs using, she said. He wore it the next Saturday, though the zipper stuck, and Ellis said it made him look like a man attempting to impersonate his father. The ridiculous comparison might once have ruined the day. Scott laughed. Denise's repayment plan moved slowly. She sold the sedan, stopped using credit cards, and took freelance billing work 2 evenings a week. Ruth sometimes sat with her statements, but never paid them. Denise never again asked what the property might sell for. She still worried. She asked about Ruth's knee, the downstairs room, the handrails, and winter ice. The questions changed because she learned to wait for answers. One Sunday, Ruth told her the kitchen step stool had become unsafe. Denise blinked. You're telling me before you fall? I thought you would enjoy the novelty. They chose a stable 2-step platform with a rail. Ruth paid for it. Loneliness did not disappear because the shed had workers. It changed its hours. Evenings remained quiet. Walter's absence still opened in ordinary places. The empty chair, the wrong side of the bed, a joke she turned to deliver before remembering. Some nights, Ruth walked to the shed after production ended and stood beside his sorting table until grief loosened enough to carry home. But mornings no longer asked her to invent every reason to rise. There were invoices to review, rows to inspect, Tasha's labels to criticize, and customers who expected the $5 basket. Help arrived according to schedules Ruth had approved. When she needed something outside them, she asked. That was the part no one applauded. It was also the part that saved her. The autumn after the renewal, Ruth was 74. She sat beneath the stand's tin awning on a cool Friday afternoon, sorting small apples into paper sacks. Her right hand tired more quickly now, so she worked in batches and rested before pain made the decision for her. Denise stood beside the cash box, updating a wholesale order sheet. She wore plain black pants and drove a compact used hatchback she disliked but had paid for outright. A gray pickup pulled onto the shoulder. A woman named Karen Holt stepped out wearing the green apron of a farm market 20 miles away. She had bought mustard from Tasha and stopped twice for apples. "I'm looking for whoever handles supply," Karen said. Denise looked up from the sheet. Ruth waited. Old habits did not disappear dramatically. They paused, offered themselves, and waited to see whether they were still welcome. Karen pointed toward the lower rows, where Scott and Ellis were arguing about a pruning cut. "We'd like to carry fresh Calder Golds next season, maybe 40 bags a week to start, more if customers take to them. I need to know whether the family can commit." Denise's mouth opened. Ruth could almost hear the old answer. "We do." Denise looked at the orchard, the shed, and Walter's sign. Then she turned toward Ruth. "You'll have to ask the owner." Karen followed her gaze. Ruth brushed a leaf from the apple in her hand. 40 bags for how many weeks? 6 to 8. Payment terms? Net 30. 15. Karen smiled. 21. Delivery? We pick up. Then 21. Karen held out her hand. Ruth stood slowly and shook it. They discussed grades, weekly volume, and the $5 basket that was not included in any wholesale agreement. Denise took notes without answering for Ruth. When Karen left, her pickup carried 2 sample bags and 4 jars of mustard. Denise leaned against the stand. "You didn't even ask Miriam. Fresh stand fruit isn't hers. You know that entire lease by memory, don't you? I paid Caroline enough to tattoo it on Ellis." From the lower rows, Ellis shouted, "I heard that." Scott shouted back, "You hear everything except instructions." The late sun caught the orchard at an angle, showing every gap where an old tree had been removed. Young grass stood in some of those spaces. Others remained open, grass growing where trunks once held shade. Denise picked up a blemished apple. $5 is too cheap. For that basket, it's right. You could get 6. I don't need 6. Denise turned the apple in her hand. "I really did think the stand was ridiculous. I know. I thought it proved you were holding on to something that was already gone." Ruth looked at Walter's handwritten warning. Some of it was gone. And the rest? Ruth watched Tasha step from the packing shed, carrying a tray of labeled jars. Miriam's station wagon came up the drive behind her. Scott walked downhill in Walter's short-sleeved coat, while Ellis directed him with the royal staff. "The rest needed work," Ruth said. A car slowed beside the stand. The driver lowered her window and held out $5. Ruth took a paper sack from beneath the bench. Denise reached for it, then stopped and let her mother make the sale.